If you can hear me anytime you're ready, we're recording.
The special meeting of June 30th, 2020 is called to order. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Mayor, yes, I will. Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up here. Mayor Kaufman. Can you all hear me? Mayor Kaufman?
He's muted.
Okay, there you are. Mayor Pro Tem Johnston.
Here.
Councilmember Bergen.
Here.
Councilmember Berzins.
Here.
Councilmember Coombs.
Present.
Councilmember Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Gruber.
Dave, you're muted.
Oh.
Here.
Okay. Councilmember Hiltz.
Here.
Councilmember Lawson.
Here.
Councilmember Marcano.
Present.
And Councilmember Murillo.
Present.
Mayor, everyone is here.
Very well. Steve, do we need we need a motion for the adoption of the agenda. There's only one item on the agenda, and that is the police department's response to Saturday's protest.
So moved.
Yeah, we don't need a motion, Mayor. We can just move forward if there's no objection.
Very well. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the agenda is adopted. Public invited to be heard.
Yep, Mayor. So we're on now 6A, and I'll just read the title of that item, and then I do have several people who have submitted comments, and I'll read those. So it's a briefing of the Aurora Police Department's response to recent protests.
Point of order, if I could.
Councilmember Gruber.
Just to verify, this is a study session meeting as opposed to a formal council meeting. That's what I understand. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. This is a special meeting, which is conducted the same as a regular meeting.
Having said that, rules require a council vote on this. Mayor has the authority to create study sessions, but I didn't think Mayor had the authority to create regular voting meetings.
The mayor can do so with 24 hours notice. Please continue.
That is correct. The rules say the mayor can call a special meeting on his own. Okay.
Public invited to be heard.
Yes, sir. All right. So the first comment is from Bethany Garcia. The entire Aurora Police Department has a culture of predatory and dangerous behavior. This starts at the top and is deeply ingrained in the entire force. This is clear in the reenactment of Elijah's murder and the events that took place at the violin vigil for Elijah. We demand all officers' camera footage to be public knowledge right away. We demand justice. Next one's from Troy Valentine. Hello, City Council. My name is Troy Valentine, and I live in Ward 6. I attended a peaceful protest in Aurora on Saturday. I went down to the People's Park and yelled at the cops because I'm angry at APD. I stood next to people who yelled and were angry too. I never, not once, witnessed any protesters throw a single thing. I did see a cop jump out of line and have to be restrained by his fellow officer. I left the protest at 4 p.m. When I got home, I turned on the live streams around dusk to witness atrocities. I have studied history and have my undergraduate degree in the subject, so when I say atrocities, that's what I mean. The international community has banned the use of force that I witnessed. There are members of our city, maybe even the Aurora ward you represent. A major act of brutality and cruelty sends the community one clear message. When our officers are acting the way they are acting, they must be disbanded. Let me make my argument as to how we've gotten here. Our PD has cost us lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. The community can't trust these officers will follow the law because they have shown they are unable to do the job. The community is clearly stating they no longer want this system anymore. I'm afraid of what the city looks like if you don't decide to disband the Aurora Police Department. Thank you for serving the people of Aurora. Next one's from Holly Cheng. Aurora council members and Mayor Kaufman, I write as a woman, or as a white woman, I really don't want to take over the voices of my Black community members, but I do want to make sure you hear from as many voices as possible that we are not okay with this. I almost took my young children to Eliza's violin vigil Saturday night, and now I'm glad I didn't. Yet more than that horrendous show of excessive force, we are still demanding justice for Elijah's family as much as one can get justice for losing a son for literally gesticulating while Black. Furthermore, it is absolutely atrocious that there are now allegations of APD officers taking pictures of themselves at the memorial site of the murder performing mock chokeholds. If this is true, there is something rotten at the core. There are no more presumable good apples in the bunch because I can assure you they would have left a long time ago. To get to the level of hiring and maintaining the type of people that would murder a young man in the way they did and then have others mocking that murder, it speaks to the entire system. As a nurse, if my colleagues in the hospital where I previously worked killed someone by giving an overdose of a med or by willingly ignoring symptoms and then mocked that death, I can promise you that I would be outing that rotten system and I would leave. Police brutality is not hyperbole to the many of the patients in my public health role. I serve clients in Aurora, many of which are Black. Due to HIPAA, I can't discuss individual cases, but I invite you to go to work with me one day after COVID allows for it, and meet the people you are making decisions for, and really listen. Listen to the new mothers that have just given birth or just pregnant and are already worried about the safety of their children in this atmosphere of police have given brutality. Can you imagine telling your child at school age to do everything right, which apparently in Aurora includes not wearing a mask and headphones, or else they could be killed and then publicly mocked? Can you even imagine the torture of Elijah's family by the city? Can you imagine, Mayor, because I can't, but they can, and you have the power to change it? And that's from Holly Chang. And the next one, give me a second. I have to pull up a different file.
Real quick point of order, Councilmember Bergen.
Councilmember Bergen.
Since this is a special meeting, were we supposed to approve an agenda or not?
We did.
Make sure. We
did approve it. We did adopt the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the next comment is from, this one is from PC Drew. Dear Mayor Kaufman and council members, I participated in the protest march and violent vigil on Saturday, June 27, 2020, in order to elevate the calls for justice for Elijah McClain's murder at the hands of Aurora Police and broadly the end of police violence and systemic racism within our criminal justice system. My privilege as a white cisgender man almost guarantees that I will never experience the systemic racism that Elijah McClain did. Over the course of about 3 hours, I watched law enforcement officers escalate an emotionally charged event with violence and failed to de-escalate the situation. I stood in front of the officers for the entire event and asked multiple officers from Aurora Police Department and Arapahoe County Sheriff's Department, 2 Aurora Police Sergeants, and Aurora Police Captain Eric Whitman a very specific question: how do we de-escalate this? The officers on the front line who were most in contact with emotionally charged protesters didn't know. They were told to hold the line. The sergeants didn't know. They were waiting on orders from others. I suggest they systemically remove their gas masks, remove their riot gear, and hand out bottles of water to the protesters. About 20 minutes later, the frontline officers removed their gas masks. Shortly thereafter, I had a lengthy conversation with Captain Whitman, the only law enforcement officer I saw present without riot gear, and conversing in a calm, diffusing manner with protesters. His initial response to my question, how do we de-escalate this, was essentially, you tell me. I told him that the removal of gas masks was a good first step and that they should remove their riot gear as well. I pointed out what was happening all up and down the line of law enforcement and protesters. People were trying to have conversations with each other, but law enforcement officers were remaining stoic and mostly unresponsive to the protesters. Lastly, shortly after 10 p.m., I reminded Captain Whitman that the alleged incident caused law enforcement officers to use violent tactics on protesters happened over 2 hours prior, and no violence from protesters had occurred since then. I then asked again, why are you refusing to de-escalate this? About 15 minutes later, law enforcement officers systemically went back into the headquarters building, and the vast majority of the protesters went home. A small contingent of protesters remained in the front of the headquarters buildings, as did a small contingent of law enforcement. The event highlighted the following things to me. Law enforcement officers escalated the use of force quickly and did not de-escalate. This trend was clear in the body camera footage of Elijah McClain's murder and during the protest Saturday, when they took no actions beyond removing gas masks to de-escalate the situation. They escalated. Was there a plan to de-escalate? Did any officers have authority to use de-escalation tactics on their own, or were they only given authority to escalate their own? Captain Whitman modeled what de-escalation might have looked like in the moment, wearing clothing that indicated he did not expect violence, engaging and listening to what people had to say, and educating protesters on ways they could be heard. Nobody else attempted de-escalation tactics. The response by Aurora Police to these protests validated the community's complaints about inappropriate use of force and lack of accountability of policing. And I will have to stop there. That is the 3-minute rule prescribed by the council rules. I will forward the rest of these comments when I can.
Mayor, point of order from Nicole.
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Hi, thank you. City Clerk's Ruger, I got a message that the phone number that's listed on the agenda for people to call in and enter the access number is not working. They're just hearing music. I know you're reading the testimony, but if there's another staff person who can address that issue.
Unfortunately, there is not, as I don't have a deputy or an assistant.
Okay.
If we can pause for 2 minutes, I will go get that line going.
Okay, thank you.
Apologize for that.
That's okay. Some people can just call in that way instead of online, so I want to make sure. Thank you.
No worries. It'll take literally 2 minutes.
That's fine. Thank you.
Go look out the window to see who's got front. You want me to sit with you through the whole thing?
Sure.
Okay, let me go get my notepad though.
And Mayor, I have a comment. Persons?
Can you hold that? We're in recess until the clerk comes back.
Okay, Mayor and Council. Paul, apologize for that. We have the public listening line patched in now.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Bersens.
Thank you. And you may have just fixed this, but I've been told that if you're trying to watch on 880 or any of the TVs, they can barely hear us.
Okay. So hopefully Randy heard that and can make some adjustments so that people can hear us better.
Thank you.
Thanks for your patience, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Are there any further public invited to be heard?
Yes, Mayor, we have several, so I'll continue where I left off.
Please.
The next one's from Alex Lakey. I was at the vigil this past weekend, and I never seen such unprovoked violence. The police threatened us with unconstitutional threats over the intercom. The unprovoked shoved over the fence and began to prepare the storm. The peaceful prepared to storm the peaceful protesters. Not only that, they also used tear gas and mace on unprotected children and adults alike, along with beating citizens with batons. I even witnessed a sheriff target a woman in a wheelchair with mace. The police escalated a peaceful vigil into another example of police brutality in this country. I've been beyond disgusted by Aurora's police. These unprovoked violence all happened during an event with many children and parents in attendance. Shame on you, Aurora. They answered our peaceful protest against police violence with more violence. Now they're lying to cover their asses. Be on the right side of history. Defund your hit squads. Next one is from Charles Germano. Thank you for holding this town hall tonight. I do have some questions and comments. Who gave the order for police to storm Saturday's vigil, not protest, in full armor and pepper spray at the ready? Why was this the order given? Who knew about it and who approved it? We've all seen the video. This was completely nonviolent until Aurora PD came in and made it violent. The police officers were clearly the aggressors. At best, this response was tone deaf given the current climate around defunding police departments nationwide and only fuels that argument. At worst, it was criminal, and I call for an investigation to determine that. The citizens of Aurora are not police's enemy. If officers want to fight an enemy, there is very different uniform they should wear, available at an Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine recruiter's office. Next one's from Laura McDaniel. I support the police in their reaction to the violent extremists who used a peaceful protest to carry out violent acts against property and law enforcement. Thank you to the Aurora Police Department. Next one is from someone identified as Emily. How can the PT justify their response to peaceful protests over the weekend when there is video evidence showing their brutality? Why is it acceptable that Aurora PD is investigating themselves and an outside independent investigation is not happening? Are you, mayor and PD chief, planning to resign due to your gross incompetence? Next one's from Pat LaMontagne. As an educator and mother, I attended the music memorial with my daughter. We arrived at 8:00 p.m. The musicians, from small children to adults, played for approximately 10 to 15 minutes before APD, dressed in full riot gear, interrupted the concert, announcing that this is an unlawful assembly. APD proceeded to attempt their intimidation by moving the crowd to the parking lot. The violinists held up their bows in protest. As a parent, educator, and resident of this community, I am embarrassed of how APD bullied the crowd, filled with families that had small children in attendance. I saw no rocks being thrown at officers. I did see people with their hands up, as well as others taking a knee in front of the police. The city and APD should be ashamed of themselves and their officers that turned a peaceful protest to meet their agenda of a riot. This was not a riot by any means. Next one's from Emily Stark. I would like to know what happened to cause the police to move forward towards the peaceful protests. If there's video evidence of violence being perpetrated towards the officers, I'd like to see that. I'd also like to know who made the decision to move forward. I have great respect for the men and women that serve and protect our community. I don't want to see them put in a lose-lose situation. If a mistake was made, own up to it and strive to do better in the future. Next one's from David Parr. Cowardly cops taking on violinists, holding a vigil. What's next? Raiding the daycares and beating kids with broomsticks to keep them in line? Cops need to start acting like cops, not the Gestapo. Next one, let's see if this one is signed. It's from Mark Sequeria. Dear Council, I'm extremely upset by the police narrative and police video claiming they calmly drove everyone away without any warning from the park the other day during a peaceful protest. People and families were sitting in the grass. This was not close to being an even-handed approach. Did you know police officers say they feel threatened when in fact they are the ones that have all the weapons and authority to kill or brutalize others? Maybe the police need to be trained on de-escalation rather than trying to present a show of force. I obviously cannot convince you, but I do object to Aurora being known as a great place to live if this is how residents are treated. The police line up in a heavily armored manner, did not escalate or talk human to human with anyone, then yell, threaten everyone who is already upset, scared, angry, and because a water bottle or two was thrown, overreact and attack everyone in the entire park, including the innocent along with the guilty. Please fire all of these officers for incompetence or for exhibiting how they use force against those not resisting them. A few officers just talking and expressing understanding the crowd's feelings probably could have calmed things down. Now everyone just hates the police. Do you train any of these officers? On a personal note, I am glad you and your kids did not get attacked or pepper sprayed. Next one is from Andrea Beasley. I would like to know who gave the order for Aurora Police to show up in full riot gear hours before the vigil was supposed to start. I also want to know who told them they could violently move in on peaceful protesters with chemical and other weapons harming children and adults. I'm curious as well about their decision to lie about their actions on Twitter when video was available to show that they were lying. Finally, I'd like to know the reasoning behind all of this. Is APD somehow thinking that these actions are helping anyone somehow? From what I can see, these actions show APD is exactly what critics allege, and worse. Next one's from Janet Figueroa. Can you please explain why the police department was called to the vigil? In the video, everyone was wearing a mask, keeping their distance, and importantly, were peaceful. There were also kids there. Why did this have to happen? Next comments from John Strain. Mayor Kaufman, I am disturbed by the police response which occurred in front of the municipal building on Saturday. The police were agitators in this clash. I know I read that the Aurora Police Department released a statement which said that some protesters had rocks. According to the department, these rocks were the justification for the police intervention and the hostility they showed the protesters. Mayor Kaufman, I supported you when you were in the House. In fact, we spoke once about the path to West Point. I know the Constitution is important to you, just as it's important to me. I am concerned that a rock used as justification for police aggression can set a dangerous precedent. The First Amendment protects our right to peaceful assembly. Violence in a public park seem about as peaceful as it can be. This is an example of the police making a mistake. Please help and hold the department accountable. And next one's from Shelley Stalker. Perhaps you can find out how your police were able to apprehend Robert Seacrat without killing him for some direction going forward. Justice for Elijah, our son, has just one behavior diagnosis at this point, and he's working hard with us, his brother, other children, and his teachers to care for himself and stay connected with the world around him by developing coping strategies very similar to Elijah's. Our son is white and unlikely to be killed for these coping behaviors. When I read Elijah's last words, I hear someone who had put a remarkable amount of time and effort into being himself. I am so proud of Elijah and devastated that he was murdered at the hands of helpers in your own town. Mayor, do the right thing and stand up for and support Elijah's family to ensure, like our son and Elijah, others like our son and Elijah are safe to be themselves going forward in your town. Ensure his murderers are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law as though Elijah was one of your own, because he was. Our family will not be able to visit Colorado or Aurora until we can be sure our son will not be killed by your police there because of his coping behaviors. Justice for Elijah. Next one's from Brendan Schultz. Hi, 2 questions. Why was the spontaneous protest shutting down 225 allowed when the pre-planned violin vigil in a public park needed to be shut down by soldiers with pepper spray? When the police chief and the mayor, when will the police chief and the mayor be submitting their resignations? I am at 15350 East Arizona Avenue, just FYI, since you pricks seem to think the only people from outside Aurora care about this case. The next one's from April Cole Worley. While the world was watching via live stream last Saturday, the Aurora PD marched into the middle of a group of unarmed community members as though it were a military invasion and not a peaceful protest, proceeded to pull out clubs, hit protesters, and spray them with pepper spray as they retreated. You could hear a woman screaming, "No, no, no," as she retreated with the crowd that included elderly and young people alike. What happened to protect and serve? I remember watching the police in China during the Tiananmen Square protests when I was young and thinking that it would never happen here, and now it has. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? The next one is from Chelsea Mulligan. I'm writing to express my support for the life of Elijah McClain. Police officers supposedly meant to protect the community murdered this young man and have yet to face justice. While Elijah begged for his life, he's described his experience as an introvert. The original police call claimed Elijah was suspicious simply for dancing on his walk home. He was wearing a mask for his medical condition. Being different is not a crime, and the police should never function as a judge, jury, and executioner. You cannot create a relationship based on trust with the citizens of Aurora. In those same cases, must live in fear of the police. Charge the police who murdered Elijah. Black Lives Matter, Chelsea Mulligan. Next one's from, looks like Katrina Zarelli. Hello, and thank you for the meeting. I have a comment. I've lived in Aurora for 2.5 years and lived in East Denver bordering Aurora for 3 years before that. As a white woman who never had any interactions with the police, I've had a neutral view of the APD during that time. I'm now sickened and appalled by my taxpayer-funded police and embarrassed that you represent my city. I do not feel myself, my husband, or my children are safe around APD. I would be fearful calling them for any reason. The country and world are watching in shock of corrupt and racist news surfacing. I know many residents are in my same position. The handling of the protest Saturday, lying on Twitter about the use of tear gas, the new investigation of police mocking Elijah's murder with photos at his memorial site, not to mention Elijah's death a year ago, all of these constitute a need for complete overhaul and restructuring of the police force. Your constituents have lost all faith in your ability to serve and protect. We need to see radical change come from the department. Next one's from Martha Burhane. Who decides when the status of an event goes from acceptable to unlawful presence, how much notice is given to attendees to disperse? Or is it a knee-jerk decision and folks do not have the luxury or time to exit before tear gas is deployed? Next one's from Mary Emmerling. And I'm going to start the timer on this one. It is lengthy. Okay. My name is Mary Emmerling. I am a recent college graduate. I am a resident of Ward 4 in Aurora, and I attended the protests on 6/27. I feel the need to empathetically reiterate that the protesters did not physically provoke the police in any way, whether it be through throwing of rocks, bottles, sticks, any and all assertion made by the APD that the protesters threw any sort of projectile at the officers before the officers started advocating is aggressively are false. When I arrived at 1:30 p.m., the police were already dressed in full riot gear, and some officers were cradling what I presume to be rubber bullet guns and other rifle-type weapons in their arms. The presence of such heavily uniformed and militarized police was incredibly incendiary, and it sent a message to the protesters that the police were already anticipating violence without any behavior from the protesters to confirm their beliefs. I observed that the protesters, as a collective, with the possible exception of a few weakly received instigators, wanted no part in the escalation encounter. A few times individual protesters would attempt to escalate the situation, but the other protesters would strictly refuse to engage and communicate. Clearly that the type of instigation was unwelcome. But the police, on the other hand, seemed to be anticipating violence the entire day, given their bulletproof vests, poise batons, and guns. Around 8:00 p.m., the formation of officers systematically broke off into groups and went into the building, coming back with gloves and gas masks on. By 8:15, all of the officers were wearing gas masks and began to crouch with their batons held out. I repeat, we were chanting and yelling, but we did not pose a physical threat to the officers. The officers then announced that our gathering had been declared unlawful because one of us had allegedly thrown a rock and that we would be subject to arrest and chemical agents. Contrary to Chief Wilson's claims after the fact, this warning was only issued once and only in English, never in Spanish, when she claimed it was. Again, the claim we had thrown rocks is a false allegation. The police then began to charge at us, pepper spray us, and hit us with batons. They were pointing guns point blank at our bodies from a very short distance, spraying us with red pepper foam and other clear liquid, and that burned excessively in our eyes, skin, and lungs. My skin and face burned over 12 hours as a result of the excessive force and chemical weapons deployed by the police at that event. This response was unacceptable. In no way did it de-escalate the situation. Not only am I disappointed in Interim Chief Wilson's decision to respond in such a way, but I'm also disgusted and abhorrent at her willingness to lie and manipulate information to protect her officers. APD must be held accountable for their actions. Thank you. Next comment is from Marissa Garand. What was the purpose to interrupt a vigil for someone killed by police while custody with more police brutality? The department denies using tear gas like that's some saving grace when pepper spray and force was rushed in on people honoring someone murdered by your cops. How dare you? You should all be removed from your positions, but I would like to hear why you think forcefully removing these people from honoring a young man you showed no respect to in life or death was reasonable to you. The eyes of America are watching. Next one's from Witten Steele. Please read this email during public comment. I was born and raised in Aurora, and while I'm not surprised at APD's actions on Saturday, I am appalled and ashamed APD's callousness interrupting a peaceful vigil. Is there a lack of trust? If there's a lack of trust, it's due to police violating the community repeatedly. They have a pattern of aggressive behavior that is threatening to the safety of community members, both in general policing actions and in other over-policing and militarized at events like Saturdays. How are they anything but militarized bullies when they show up armed to the teeth in bulletproof vests and riot helmets with rifles and chemical agents? How can we feel they're anything but an armed gang, allowed to act with impunity, disrupting a peaceful vigil and forcing community members out of a public space of mourning? Why deploy chemical agents against community members who pose no concrete threat to safety? I trained yearly in de-escalation tactics and showed up dressed for a fight is antithetical to the principles of de-escalation. Aurora police went to Saturday's events dressed for a riot that was not coming to them, but when you're trained to be a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If APD wants this community's trust, it's going to take more than a defensive posture on the news from the interim chief or a poorly thought out, toothless Mike Koopa if one were to come. If APD wants community trust, it's going to require demilitarization, police working with the community, shifting of many responsibilities to those infinitely more qualified to handle them, and real process of transparency and reconciliation, which absolutely must include the firing of those who perpetrated harm on our community, in solidarity with those working for safety communities, Witt and Steele. Next one's from Catherine Lees. I would like to thank council members Marcano, Coombs, and Murillo for hosting the Public Safety and Police Forum last night. It was very informative and provided a view of how health and public safety can be transformed to serve communities instead of harm communities. I appreciate that there isn't one solution that the council members were pushing. They were simply starting a much needed conversation. I ask the rest of the city council and Mayor Kaufman can follow these brave council members' lead and start having conversations and make bold decisions. It is clear from its choices this week that APD is out of control and has lost sight of its mission, vision, and values. There's 3 bullet points. It is not making Aurora safe every day. It puts families in danger last Saturday night. And BIPOC are not safe when interacting with APD. It has lost sight of its vision because it has not built strong community partnerships through its constitutional and respectful police service. It is neither honor nor integrity and appears that the only duty it serves is to protect its own. I'm asking for a full investigation of the department's action at the vigil for Elijah McClain, as well as the disgusting reenactment of the murder this past week. I would also like the council to ensure that any of the whistleblowers that brought these photos to IAD are not retaliated officially or unofficially against for doing the right thing. They should be thanked and rewarded for acting with integrity to shine a light on the toxic department. Next one is from MSRAUTTEN is the reply. We want more funding for more training. Aurora needs more police and resources. More of the citizens stand back the Aurora Police. Next one's from Sheila McClain. To whom it may concern, I am appalled by the actions taken by the Aurora Police against peaceful protesters last Saturday. I know these violin players are a pretty lawless bunch and all, but I really don't think tear-causing chemicals and rubber bullets were called for. No one was looting anything. No one was burning anything. I believe more could have been done to de-escalate the situation. Instead, police reacted in an all too stereotypical and unproductive fashion. I am ashamed to say that I live here. And there's a handful more that have come in. This one's from Rosemarie Del Monte. In an interview with Ryan Osborne of the Denver Channel, interim chief Vanessa Williams was asked why it is important for her to get to the front of this less than 24 hours after the events of Saturday evening. She stated that it is because it's what the community wanted. In listening to the interview, however, it appears more likely that she wanted to pull her spin on the events that day. The majority of her claims are in direct contradiction to the observations of people participating in the protests, including my daughter and her friend, and in direct contradiction to what is seen on the numerous videos available online. She makes numerous statements in an attempt to justify the use of force employed by the officers there, who incidentally were not just APD. Numerous officers had vests saying sheriff, etc., and appeared to be from other jurisdictions. She stated that the reason police were dressed in riot gear at the very beginning of the protest was because APD gathered intel that the people from Antifa and other groups had made statements about Saturday's protest reverting to the So I'll finish this comment. I got a note too. So, which led to APD to believe that many protesters wanted a violent interaction. She can make claims that like this all day long. Your job as a council member is to demand evidence corroborating her statement. Where is the confirmation of this alleged intel? How is it received? In writing, by phone, social media? Demands to see proof. She came there with protesters with sticks and pipes, passing out rocks among themselves. Where is the body cam or other video showing this? Numerous photojournalists were present all day. Were the photos showing these rocks being passed around? Surely she knows the department is under increased scrutiny. Wouldn't it be logical for her to be extraordinarily careful to document all such reports in order to prove the APD was making an attempt to follow the Senate bill to a T, as she claims? There were hundreds of officers in riot gear. How many were wearing body cameras? If not all, why not, demand accountability of her and all the officers, not only because they take an oath to protect and serve, but also because they are also the public face of the city of Aurora and making us look like the Banana Republic. Okay, the next comment is from M. Berglund. I have lived in Aurora my entire life. During that time, I have never had an encounter with the police that led me to have any feelings of concern for our police department. Following the theater shooting, my neighbors and I cooked meals and delivered them to officers clearing the shooter's apartment. I volunteered with the department as a victim advocate, as did my mom, who was awarded Advocate of the Year. Professionally, I had the officers at my side many times when facing unsafe situations. I always felt protected, but recently we have seen a different and disturbing side to the departments. I was at the vigil. I had been at the student-led march earlier with my daughter. As we arrived, we heard large bangs and saw something fill the air. In disbelief that it could be something ominous, we proceeded to the violin concert. There we stood listening to music. As we listened, officers were encroaching us and their batons on innocent people, grieving the murder of Elijah by this very department. As the crowd moved to the parking lot, I stood in defense of a young man being screamed at by an officer with his name covered on his vest by his sunglasses. When people were saying Elijah's name, this same officer pushed a man back with his baton. I asked the officer why. I asked him why of this violence was in his heart, to which he laughed in response. I asked him why, and another officer told me to be safe and moved back right before the officer, covering his name, screamed in my face and threatened me with his baton. This was Officer Blue. His glasses moved and uncovered his name as he lunged at me. In that moment, the respect and honor I had given the APD was gone. The people of Aurora deserve better than this. We deserve officers who can and will protect us, even if it means protecting us against their own. When I saw the news of that picture taken where Elijah was killed, I never doubted officers in this department would do that. It only scares me that it took so long for my eyes to be opened to what this department is capable of. Next one's from Kathy Ryan Morgan. Two may concern. Single family housing is, that's a different topic. This one's from Ashley S. My name is Ashley Sherez, and I live in Longmont, Colorado. I asked the Aurora Police Department to implement anti-racist education for your team for white and white passing members to actively engage as part of their duties. This will help your community to know you are committed to imperative change that has to occur on a personal level in order to make racial justice an ongoing priority rather than a seasonal priority in response to public demand. This will help increase our trust in you and improve your relationship with those you work with on behalf of. In response to my request, please inform the public of what anti-racism education plans you have so we can know you're doing work. See my suggestions below. You may be engaged already and have a more sophisticated program in place than I've suggested. Of course, I and the rest of the public can only know that what you are doing if you let us know. I and my fellow white humans have relationships to repair. This is part of that. I would like to see all white officials and community leaders in Colorado engaging in effective anti-racism education and ongoingly. There are many anti-racism educators available who can provide workshops, names of films to watch, books to read, and self-reflective processes to use. It is also an opportunity to support Black or BIPOC business by hiring a BIPOC educator. One local woman I know and recommend is Dawn Walton. She runs workshops and can help design a program to meet the needs of your organization. Please contact her via her website that is provided. These comments will be forwarded. As one simple place to start, I recommend having every white member of your office and organization watch documentaries at least weekly and commit to reading or listening to one of several anti-racism books. Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Sad, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibrahim X. Kendi. As a woman with white privilege engaged in the same kind of anti-racism work, I'm recommending has helped me see my own white superiority, and I've been previously unaware and therefore take ownership and choose different actions moving forward instead of unintentionally acting from internalized racist assumptions. Thank you. Next one's from Vicky Tario. Please share the plan to change the training and process of APD. Riot gear to a peaceful protest is wrong. This ensures you start there if we have not drafted any changes as of yet. Next one's from Max Wilpert. I was at the violin vigil this past Saturday to play music. Aside from the horrible violence perpetrated against peaceful protesters, including children, I ask you how anyone can be expected to trust APD following these actions. How can we trust any statement from APD when they blatantly lie about their use of chemical weapons, when video evidence directly contradicts them? How can they be expected to investigate their own conduct? And how can we trust the results of any APD investigations when they have themselves so willingly lied blatantly? Okay, next one is from Michael F. The Aurora PD did what they had to do to protect their police department and city hall. You blowhard city council members should stand there and protect the buildings if you don't like what cops are doing. The cops are doing the best they can. Violent protesters are here to disrupt the city and take it over. Chief Wilson and her executive team have to make quick and tough decisions, tell the protesters to stop charging officers, throwing objects at them, and grow up and show some class. Next one's from Lorena Rodriguez. I'm very saddened by what's going on in our community. We are citizens in Aurora, and both my husband and I are professionals who pay our fair share of taxes. It is what we deserve from a police force. Is this what we deserve from a police force? In recent events, it leads me to believe that we don't hire police officers appropriate for our city. The lack of training and compassion. As a nurse, I am held accountable for any mistake I make. We are required to make changes to our practices, any event that causes harm. Why we aren't making changes to who we hire? Why aren't we making changes to who we hire and how we train our police in our city? The next one's from, it just says, C. Basavo. I watched from New Jersey and am appalled on how the police treated peaceful protests holding a vigil. I am now afraid to visit your town. Someone needs to be held accountable for this dangerous police action. Luckily, it didn't end up worse than it did. That's Karen Savo. This one's from Elliot. The Aurora PD pulled a similar stunt back in September and bragged about it online during a peaceful protest of the Geo Warden's house. I brought my kids to that protest. The police were in full riot gear, corralled us, and shouted, "Move, move," at us despite us just peacefully marching. As a result, my kids refused to go to any protest and distrust the police. This appears to be a deep culture issue that cannot be reformed out of your PD. They should be disbanded and replaced like Camden, New Jersey did. Also, Darren O'Connor was there as a legal observer and can vouch for a lot of what I'm saying, which, given our very different political views, he is an extreme progressive and I'm a conservative libertarian, should give you pause. Next one's from Charles Gardner. While I did not attend the public gathering on June 27th, I did appreciate receiving the updates throughout the day from the police department. I'm writing to encourage the council to use today's meeting to set a professional and pragmatic tone regarding the events of June 27th. There will be many accounts which will be unverified. Please move forward on the facts, not the rumors. We have chosen you to be our leaders, and I wish you find positive direction for this community. This one's from Betsy Ruckard. The last words of Elijah McClain before he was murdered by the Aurora Police Department. I can't breathe. I have my ID right here. I have my ID. My name is Elijah McClain. That's my house. That's all I was doing. I just got home. I'm an introvert. I'm just different. I'm just different. That's all. That's all I was doing. I'm so sorry. I have no gun. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting. Why were you checking me? I don't even kill flies. I don't eat meat. And I'm not a vegetarian. I don't judge people who eat meat. Forgive me. All I was trying to do was become better. I will do it. I will do anything. Sacrifice my identity. I'll do it. You all are phenomenal. You are beautiful. And I love you. You can try to forgive me. I am a mood Gemini. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Ow, that really hurts. You are all very strong. Teamwork makes the dream work. Crying, adjusting to breathe better. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to do that. I just can't breathe correctly. Proceeds to vomit from the pressure to his chest and neck. The officers who had him in a carotid hold and then injected him with ketamine without checking his medical history. He was declared dead 3 days later in the hospital. Friends and family say Elijah was an introvert, anemic, and played violins for kittens at the animal shelter because he felt they were lonely. I'm going to take just a pause. And let's see. Yeah. Let's see. I got a comment that said, also, I feel it's best that the public comments were handed off to our mayor to read instead. He should be the one placing forth his voice since he is supposed to be the voice for Aurora. I have 6 more comments. They keep coming in, so I'll read them as I can. Mayor Kaufman, as a resident of Aurora, I support our police department. There have been some truly unfortunate situations over the past few years. However, the majority of the APD is very dedicated to the protection and safety of all residents, regardless of skin color. I was not at the McClain incident and therefore won't comment as we await yet another investigation. However, I don't want to live in a place in America without police. The thought of dismantling or defending this great organization is unthinkable. There is no profession in the world in which a few bad apples don't exist. Police fight for their lives every day as protesters and rioters threaten to kill them, yet they expect to stand by and take it. This treatment of our officers by Aurora citizens is unacceptable. I ask that you handle the issue at hand, and let's keep things in perspective and not lose sight of the good that is done by our officers. A peaceful vigil does not involve throwing projectiles at the police. It's no wonder they show up in riot gear, as this is no different than threats soldiers face in third world countries. We as a community need to step up against violence by all, not just the police. We are not as outraged by gang violence and other criminals who kill people in our streets. The real problem is ours to fix, and the community standing up against total violence. So it's Maggie Halverson. Thank you for protecting the property we all paid for. I stand behind the mayor and Aurora Police Department. This one's from Zahib. My name is Zabib, and I'm Aurora resident, Ward 1. What the APD did to protesters Saturday, June 30th, 2020 is terrorism. Why in the hell were they dressed in riot gear? They wanted to start a riot and blame it on protesters. Their actions were premeditated. I am thoroughly disgusted by the actions of the police across this country. We are under dictatorship because this does not happen in democracy. What's the point of First Amendment when all law enforcement does is violate it? This one's from Zach Beyer. How are citizens expected to trust APD when we constantly see they are allowed to break the law? A cop was drunk in a government car with several weapons. If a citizen had done the same, those cops would love to put them in a cage for life, but he got the benefit of corruption. This is disgusting. You have no interest in putting your gang in check. Stop the lies and resign. Next one's from Hexed by Bext. Stop protecting crooked police. Stop harboring state-sanctioned violence. When did de-escalation stop being an objective for police? It's time to act now. We will not stop until we see justice. We have videos, photos, and documented evidence of the APD using excessive force. Do the right thing and stop protecting crooked cops. This one's from Elena G. I'm a white woman and was born and raised in Aurora. It has been absolutely disgusting and inexcusable the ways in which Aurora PD has handled pretty much anything. In regards to protests, why would any of these cops hold themselves accountable to uphold the law when the department they work for could care less? Nate Meyer, Nathan Woodyard, no investigation will show anything other than gross incompetence and disregard for the people they are supposed to protect. DUI and murder gets you blacklisted anywhere else except to the police department, and Aurora is a sad example of that. Things need to change, and the public has had enough of the lies. This one's from Robin Eldridge Kinner. Dear Mayor and Council, shame on you for not taking the hardest possible stance against the completely inappropriate and dangerous response by APD during the protests on June 30th. Shame on you for letting our fantastic alley-ridden city look like just another problem on the map. Shame on you for letting our children, who are already scared of the police, see them attack unarmed citizens. Shame on you for not learning from Denver and seeing that the police response directly correlates to the movements of peaceful protesters who feel the need to respond to the very issues they are there to address. Shame on you for your delay in handling Elijah's case properly. Shame on you for dancing with officers who should be in jail. This shame is on all of you because some of you are tone deaf. Fix it, or we will replace you with people who will. We demand immediate action, ongoing commitment to anti-racism. Mr. Mayor, I'm talking to you especially. Your response this far is trash. Next one's from Andy M. I lived in Aurora during the past 25 years of my life. I volunteered, worked, and studied in the city. My experience with the police department in the city where I lived was being hit by a sheriff running a red light, having headphones, telephones, and other property yanked from my person while walking in public, and experiencing racist profile and racist violence directed towards my non-white friends. Of course, my experience in both Denver and Aurora as a peaceful demonstrator have involved threats and use of violence against me and my friends. The budget shows almost $170,000 spent on each officer in the police department. This is opposed to barely $11,000 per student. My experience while struggling with mental health, poverty, and homelessness, and the lack of resources available to a person other than an officer with a handgun has shown me that any other distribution of this money would be better than openly providing hand weapons and equipment to what has become a state-sponsored white power organization misquandering as public servants. I beg of you, as frequent visitors of the city and for my family and friends who still live in Aurora, to abolish the police and help the public. This one's from Craig Spunkin. I won't be shopping in Aurora until you fire the police chief and reform the police. I watched the footage and had the idea that this peaceful group of protesters, there was a threat. It's laughable. If we didn't see violinists and families attacked, fire these thugs. This isn't police. This is gang behavior. This one's from Spencer H. When I was at the peaceful protests in Denver over multiple nights, I saw the use of Aurora heavy armored vehicles blocking streets with men in riot gear who I'm assuming were Aurora PD. The men were armed in full riot gear. Heavy weapons on or around the heavy armored vehicle was unnecessary to have in the public in the first place. A few weeks later, at the town hall interview, a new police chief, all who were applying for the new police chief position were asked to take a stance on the demilitarization of the police, and they all said the equipment was required and necessary. This past weekend, Aurora PD showed the world why this equipment is necessary, which is to squash anyone who questions their authority. The police system is not vital to our public safety anymore and poses a threat to all who live in Aurora. It is ineffective and it needs to be dismantled. Shifting funding to strategies that are effective. Defund the police. Enough is enough. We're tired of this bull, fill in the blank. Stop protecting murderers. Stop killing people. We will not continue to inconvenience you and occupy your streets. We will continue to inconvenience you and occupy your streets until justice is served and meaningful action is taken. That's from Becca Moser. This one's from Lisa Tram. Thank you for hosting tonight's meeting. I currently live in Aurora, Colorado, and I'm a constituent of yours. As I am listening to this meeting, I agree with much of the protesters' frustrations. I was a protester on Saturday and witnessed the police brutality once again. I'm demanding all three officers, Nathan Woodyard, Jason Rosenblatt, and Randy Rodema, be fired upon immediately. If Vanessa Wilson can hold up to her own words, then she would have already fired them. I'm also demanding that Aurora Police Department don't make themselves present during the next protests, even as undercovers, while protesters took care of each other and the property we place our tax dollars onto. Aurora Police Department, please back off or come unarmed if you have to send in your cops. This one's from Melissa Scambia. Mayor Kaufman, you have expressed deep concern by the latest mocking photos and concern the city manager Twombly's pick to lead review of the Elijah murders is too biased for law enforcement. Please describe your current concern for Elijah and his family and the fact that he was murdered, tortured. We need to hear your plan for justice. Nobody cares about your concern unless you're going to put actions behind them. Fire all the police involved in murder and mockery of it. This one says, I would like to remain anonymous. The sheer volume of lies perpetrated by APD about the protests on Saturday is telling. The only difference between violence by criminals and violence by police are meant to be accountable to us. We have a privileged class of racist cowards who are enacting violence upon the public. How is it acceptable that the police can unilaterally decide something is unlawful gathering? We need community oversight of the police at the very least. We need to change things drastically now. Shut it down.
Is there any, is there any objection to holding the remaining letters or public invited to be heard comments until after we hear from Vanessa Williams, the interim police chief, as well as an opportunity for members to ask questions of her?
Mayor, this is Councilmember Bergen.
Councilmember Bergen.
I would like that because I actually think this should have been a study session because we are getting a briefing presentation from the police on what happened and we are not voting on anything tonight. So I don't even know why we have public comments to begin with because it should have been a study session, but I would agree to pause.
Okay. Is there objection? Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, my camera is off. How many comments do we have left?
Councilmember Marcano, Mayor Kaufman, there's 4 more, but they come in 1 a minute. So I'd probably keep reading them all night. There's 5 more. So whatever you all want me to do, I'm going to need a break at some point, please.
Well, we're not going to be able to conduct this meeting. I mean, we're going to be here for a very long time, but better that at least in terms of getting to the substance of this special meeting, we're not going to be able to get to it because the messages are coming in faster than they're being read.
That's correct, Mayor.
Mayor, I just wanted to ask, why are we getting comments after the meeting started? Because normally, first of all, like I said, it should have been a study session, but if it is a council meeting that we're not voting on anything, why are comments coming in after the meeting started at 5:30?
Is there any objection to delaying the reading of further public who invited to be heard comments until after the presentation and questions?
Mayor.
Councilmember McClain.
Thank you. I would like to finish the ones that we have, and then any that come in after, I'd be fine with having them read at the end. And to answer Councilmember Bergen's question, it's because we were elected to serve the people of Aurora, Colorado, so I would very much like to hear from them. Thank you.
To the clerk, how many are there right now?
Let's see. So there are 1, 2, 3. There are 5 that I've not read that have come in.
Okay, read those, and then we will then go to presentation by staff and questions, and then we will finish up with those that have come in.
Okay. So this one's from Amy Wiles. As a member of our city's Human Relations Commission, I was horrified by the lack of human decency shown by the APD this weekend. Officers missed a great opportunity to show up as partners and instead presented as bullies. How can we expect the residents to feel safe when instead of a PD who is here to protect that are instead here to investigate violence? We're being watched by the entire world, and we as a city are failing miserably. The entire PD needs an overhaul with no real action and change and less excuses and placating. Next one's from Ben Legerio. I moved from the Deep South hoping Aurora would be a safer place for me and my family. I've been proven wrong. Please take drastic measures to ensure actual safety and ensure that police do not have power that they can abuse. Please do not make this meeting just a PR stunt. Please take actual action. Next one is from Lindsay Weber, and this one says, APD is dehumanizing the very people that they are charged with protecting. Police in riot gear are completely out of line for a violent vigil. I urge you to decrease funding from APD and move it to human and social services that will actually help residents. APD have repeatedly shown they do not care about people. They do not act with compassion or empathy. Next one's from Michael Hughes. Hello, Mayor and council members. As a resident of Aurora, the continued shame of our thin blue line that probably cannot walk a straight line during the day is appalling. The officers clearly do not have the proper training to be guarding a mall, which is something else they cannot seem to do. They act like a gang, covering each other's tracks and doing nothing to serve the community. Fire the entire department. This one's from Velcro Salad. We do not lose heart. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed by the new day to day. From our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us external glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And then the last one that has come in since we paused is from Vanessa McClain. As a citizen of Aurora, I urge you to think about the officers that have saved hundreds of thousands of lives in this city over the years. I have always felt safe with APD. We have a department full of amazing police officers that would and have put their lives on the line to protect the city. If it were anybody else being hit with rocks, we would support their ability to defend themselves. But the message that is being given out in Aurora and the nation is that you're a police officer, you are no longer allowed to defend yourself. And Mayor, that's it now. Just so you know, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more that have come in while I read those ones.
Very well. Okay, we will now proceed with the presentation.
Mayor, this is Francois Bergen. Why are we continuing to get comments minute by minute? We have rules, and the rules say that you have to have your comments in by a certain time. For example, when we have council meetings that start at 7:30, they must come in by that time. I don't understand this process. It's not. We
also read them at the end. Right now, we're going to go to the presentation by the interim chief of police. Is there any objection to that? Very well. Please proceed.
Hey, good afternoon, Council. Stephen Ruger is going to be handling the visuals for us. We don't have control of that. So, Stephen, if you need a few minutes, just let us know. While he's getting that ready, I want to thank all of those that took the time to write in. Your words have not fallen on deaf ears with me. It's a very emotional moment for me right now. And I will do my best to get through this presentation.
And Chief, I apologize. I don't find where I received the presentations. Maybe, Mayor, we could take a 5-minute break and get the presentation up.
Council stands in 5-minute recess.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor and members of our police department and council, we have a presentation loaded now. So whenever police department's ready, we can go through their PowerPoint. And yep.
Okay.
Please proceed.
Is everyone back? Okay. Mayor and council, thank you for this opportunity to go over. I know that the community is eager to see this information as well as council. So I appreciate you calling this special meeting. And I just wanted to say that I understand the situation that this community is in, and the last thing that I personally or any of my officers wanted that day was for us to have to do anything. We had 7.5 hours of peaceful protests. It was a beautiful thing. People marched through the streets. They took the highway. We made it safe for them to do so that no one would run through the crowds as we've seen across the country. And I just wanted to say to the community that this didn't have to happen. And I understand your frustration. I understand that there's people that don't understand why we did certain things. So I hope this clears it up and that you give us an opportunity to listen. And as I listen to you, I please give me the opportunity to explain the situation as I saw it and as my people saw it. I am the head of this agency and I take full responsibility for Saturday. And anyway, let's get started. Next slide, please. So I just really want to give an overview of just kind of the how information before the event started. As many people saw, the Great Lawn was boarded up. The entire campus was boarded up. We've had several rallies, protests, demonstrations since the tragic death of George Floyd, and we had zero issues whatsoever. The organizers were very willing to speak with us, to speak with my intelligence unit, and we had an open conversation and about what would you like to see from the police department. Do you want us out? You know, they wanted protection, obviously, because we have extremist groups from left and right wing that are across the nation, I think, trying to hijack these peaceful demonstrations, trying to drive a different narrative and blame the folks that are fighting for police reform, try to blame those folks for the violence. But it's really these, what I would say, the extremist groups. Unfortunately, in this situation, there were several different events that were planned throughout the day on the Great Lawn. There was the Denver Party for Socialism and Liberation, and the Denver Communists and Abolish ICE Group were all coming to protest. There was intelligence that I received that week that they were indicating that they wanted people to riot, that they wanted to cause violence, because I have a Facebook post here from the Denver Communists saying, crazy how Minneapolis burned and George Floyd's killers were charged with, Atlanta burned and Rashard Brooks' killers were charged, and Louisville hasn't burned and Breonna Taylor's killers haven't been charged. What a weird coincidence. Several of these types of calling for violence, calling for people to protest. And so we have direct communication and information that the people were coming to cause issues, and specifically people that identified with Antifa group. I saw as we were in Denver, and I think all of us watched in horror as nightfall in Denver, where it became fires were set, buildings were desecrated, officers were struck, innocent protesters were hurt in the melee, and I never wanted that to happen here. I never thought it would happen here because this is Aurora, and like I said, we'd had many demonstrations, and people were angry and were letting their voices be heard, but never did it turn to violence. So with this, I briefed each council member and the city management on the intelligence that was coming in, that this crowd was coming, and they were determined to cause issues. So as the day started noon to 1, we had attendees arriving at the AMC campus for the event, 1 to 2. Some protesters sort of focused on the APD entrance and were, having their rights, their First Amendment rights chanting and doing everything that they had every right to be there and every right to do. At the same time as this group was focused on the police department, on the east side of campus where the stairs are, there were several other groups that were coming to give speeches. Elijah's mom, Shanine, came and spoke to the crowd, and Tay Anderson and people came and spoke to the crowd, and everything was peaceful. And they marched throughout the city. Can we have the next slide, please? 2 to 3 p.m. is when the protesters started marching. We made sure as the police department that we were ahead of them to make sure we could stop traffic, to give them a safe route, and to, again, allow them to protest. Everything was peaceful. There were a core group of agitators that stayed behind at APD, continually focused on the police department, not really going to the other speeches that were being given. There was a pre-planned student protest that was started to set up about 3 to 4. We actually, you know, I was in constant communication with Councilmember Coombs because I was concerned about the kids being there with this intelligence that I had, and then seeing the people that were starting to show up from that group that I knew wanted to cause issues. We saw them arriving on scene. Next slide, please. So 4 to 5, the issues began to present themselves at the courtyard of the police department. I actually have Division Chief Parker here, Sergeant Matt Brookbacher, and also Commander Redfern. They were the lead officers in command on the ground. I was up here in the command post watching and getting intelligence, when making sure the media was tweeting out. We tried to tweet to give information throughout the day of how things were going and to let people that were following us know what was happening. 4 to 5, the marchers returned to AMC, and the issue started to begin. Next slide, please. The student-led protests, they left the campus. They went to the streets. We were assisted again by APD patrols for their safety. And while they were on their march, they paused at Chambers and Alameda and did a vigil there. And so we were watching that to make sure there were no issues, monitoring that there was no issues with traffic or anyone trying to interfere with what the kids were doing. And at that time, the issue started escalating at the focal point of the police department, not the courtyard, not the fountain area or the steps. So about 6 to 7, the street march came back onto the ground. Next slide, please. 7 to 8, things start to escalate on the courtyard, and the decision was to give, at the same time, the attendees for the violin concert and vigil began to arrive. Peaceful people with their kids, as people have described in there. Some of the people that were actually there, they were just there to listen to a beautiful vigil for Elijah. And I wish that could have continued to happen. The things were escalating. I'm going to turn it over here to Division Chief Parker to go on what he was seeing on the ground and all the issues that we were facing, so that people can have a better understanding of what our intent was. And when I say that about the intent, I just need everyone to understand that the intent was to protect people and to not have this group of agitators who we knew were coming and were going to push the issue to the point where they interrupted what was trying to happen on this side of the Great Lawn. It's a very large lawn, as we all know. So what was happening between the police station is kind of set back. And so the people that were peaceful were focused on the violins, of course. And so they weren't being able to see what was going on in front of the police department. Next slide. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to go ahead, if we can go forward to his presentation, and because I'm just reading everything that happened. So
if we could, Steve Ruger, if you could do me a favor, if we could pull up the map that I sent you, that'll be a little bit helpful, I think, in further explanation. to class. Okay, so for those of you who can see it, you'll recognize that's the AMC campus with the courthouse, jail, the police department, and AMC over on the right there. The Great Lawn, obviously, in the center of it. So, purpose of this is for those that aren't familiar with the area, or when you see videos later as I'm describing things, to kind of have a better picture for what we were looking at. So the Great Lawn, you'll see, is that area that's surrounded in a red border. Obviously, a huge area that was available for all those that wanted to come and do the peaceful protesting. The large circle over the right with the star in the middle is typically, that's the in front of the steps leading up to AMC. That's typically where we see speeches and demonstrations and sort of the focal points of demonstrations and things. The yellow box kind of at the center there, that is the area where the protesters that came that focused on the police department. Right behind that, or I guess above that on the image, is sort of a purple bordered area. That is the entry to the courtyard, which leads straight to the front doors of the police department. And there's the courtyard area, to the courts, and then over to the right, more of the police courtyard area. So the bicycle fencing that you're going to hear me talk about is essentially, it was initially, I wish I could point it out better. It was initially sort of the yellow lines on the right and left, and the blue line in the front there. That's how we originally had it set up. And then later on, you'll hear me talk about how we reconfigured it, and it was more along the lines of sort of where the purple and yellow are. So I guess I just wanted everyone to kind of have an understanding of sort of the lay of the land, what we're talking about, where the initial really 7.5, 8 hours of our contact between the police and protesters was focused on that area that sort of pinches together between the courthouse and the museum. Okay, if nobody has any questions about that part, I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Steve Ruger, can you go back to the PowerPoint? Okay, so I believe this is where we left off. So as the chief described, there had been several groups coming, doing speeches and different things that were occurring. We really didn't have any involvement with them. They were out of our view. They weren't focused on us. Those things were existing sort of really independently of us. At some point, people had left. A large group left to do the marches over to the highway, which was blocked. Later on, they did a march and blocked Alameda. Those types of things happened independently of us, other than us providing some security, as the chief described. There was a group that really never left that bicycle barrier fencing that we set up. Our intent from the beginning of this was not to engage anybody. We set up a bicycle barrier fence across that relatively short distance in comparison to the area that was available to the protesters. We had 4 uniformed officers, but they were not in any kind of protective gear other than the normal body armor that they wear. Very low key. We were just there basically to keep an eye on the bicycle fencing. When the initial, some of the initial protesters that showed up, just zeroed in on those officers for whatever reason, and that was sort of the start of the interaction between some of the protesters and us. That continued for some time. I've lost timeline, but that continued for some time until there was a point where we saw we were getting information from the command post and from our own observations that people were donning helmets. People in the crowd were donning helmets, putting on protective gear of their own, were arming themselves with rocks and things like that. And we became concerned for the safety of our officers out front, and we then made the decision to replace them with ERT officers who at this point were not visible to anybody. We did bring out 2 lines of ERT officers. The ERT officers do wear protective equipment, which is, helmets, face shields, and chest protectors and those types of things. And that did cause a reaction from the folks up front along the bicycle fencing. So as this continued, and I'm sorry, I may not be following this PowerPoint exactly, but I'm just telling you I was out on the line, so I'm kind of going from my memory. Can you go forward one slide, please, and just see? No, I'm sorry, go back. So at any rate, at one point, we actually tried to de-escalate by moving our ERT officers that were causing a reaction from the crowd. We actually moved them back behind the walls on either side of the courthouse or the other side of the east side of the courtyard, so they were out of sight of the protesters. The only people that were visible to the folks that were focused on us were persons like myself, a couple other officers that were up on the patio to the museum that's kind of inside the courtyard there. And the only reason we were there was really just to maintain an eye on the group that was there at the bicycle fencing, because we were starting to see that they were moving the fencing. They were we had the fencing interlocked with handcuffs, toe straps, zip ties, those types of things to try to be a little more secure, a little more solid. But those things were being defeated, so we were concerned about that. So we're trying to keep an eye on it.
So when you say defeated, they were cutting the straps and cutting the zip ties so that they could move the fence easily. Do you need to change the screen that you're looking at?
No, it's okay. It's okay. So at one point, we actually observed a person cut the toe strap and separate a portion of fencing from the rest of the fencing, which created an opening in the fence. This caused us some concern again with the increase in information they were getting that some of the people in the group were arming themselves with rocks and donning helmets and those types of things. So we did bring our ERT back out at that point. And again, that caused a reaction. And let me back up because I think I may have misspoke. There was a point before we brought the ERT group out for the second time. I apologize. The fencing was actually knocked completely over, and when that was knocked over, that's when we brought our ERT group out. So at any rate, that occurred. We brought our ERT group out. We attempted to de-escalate by moving back from the fencing. That helped a little bit. And then again, we moved behind the walls of the courthouse and the courtyard and brought our ERT group out of sight. And during this, at some point during this, when the crowd left for the marches and those types of things, there was not very many. The group in front of the bicycle barricade actually was reduced enough that we could move out in front of it. We reassembled the bicycle fencing in such a manner that we moved it back closer to the entrance to the courtyard, and tried to make it more secure by doubling it up, and then moved back behind it. During this time, the crowds from the marches had come back. The group in front of the bicycle barricade grew again. Things began to escalate. And so it was at that time that the barrier was defeated again, meaning it was knocked over. At one point it was picked up and moved over there's a wall that kind of separates the ramp that leads up to the museum. That was knocked over. So we brought our ERT group out again. So I guess what I'm trying to describe for you here is our initial plan all along was to be out of sight. The only officers we had visible initially were not officers in protective gear. We brought them out in reaction to what we felt was a situation that was becoming unsafe. Repeatedly tried to de-escalate by moving our ERT officers, who are the ones in protective gear, who would get a reaction from the group. We repeatedly moved them back out of sight. We only brought them forward when we felt like we needed to, because the barrier that we had set up was being manipulated and being knocked down. We at one point, even when we had the group up and the fence was on the ground, essentially it had been knocked over and was laying on the ground and was being walked on, despite repeated orders for the protesters to remain behind the fence. We actually even attempted to de-escalate again by moving those ERT officers back 10 yards to create some distance. And so this was sort of back and forth of us what we felt like were increasing threats. Again, seeing more and more people putting on helmets and sort of their own protective gear, bringing umbrellas, which we know can conceal what folks are what people that intend harm are trying to do, get things out of backpacks. We did see people with backpacks that seemed to be very heavy. We saw a female later passing out rocks from one of these backpacks. We were receiving information from our command post that people were going, a small group of people were going and gathering rocks from over by the courthouse, and were bringing those to other people and passing those out. We also, at some point, again, let me just say, throughout all of this, orders were repeatedly being given in English and in Spanish. Those orders we felt were necessary to make it clear, our position was really defensive, that we just, we wanted them to stay essentially where they were. We weren't ordering them to disperse initially, but even the downside of the orders was that it would also elicit a reaction. So it was really a balance between, feeling the need to give the orders to try to be clear of our position, also understanding that might also, it did cause a reaction. So this continued, and as it started to become, we knew, nightfall was coming. We know from history, seeing around the country and our own experiences in Denver, what happens very, very frequently as nightfall comes. Those that attend these events that have a purpose other than peaceful protest, the purposes that Chief Wilson already described, that we had received intelligence that there were people there that intended to do this. This was supported by our own observations, and we felt like that we needed to secure our fencing again. And so at that point, we developed a plan to move past the fencing with our ERT group. And the intent was to move past the fencing, move the crowd, away from that, so that we could get that set up again. The other thing we wanted to do was bring in a group that had been out of sight throughout this entire day, ERT squads that had been in the AMC building the entire day and had no interaction with anybody. We did bring them over to the museum wall, I guess south side of the museum wall, because there were several protesters there who had gained a position there despite there being construction fencing and trespassing signs that prohibited them being there. They just moved that fencing and took that position up, and that was tactically disadvantaged to us. They were basically elevated over our officers, and we saw members of this group that were arming themselves with rocks. And so we wanted to, in a coordinated effort to get our bicycle fencing set back up, we also wanted to secure that area on the south side of the museum and move those individuals out of there because we felt it was unsafe.
Can I just jump in for just a second? And so when we talk about people arming themselves with rocks, we had undercovers in the crowd. We actually had people that were next in proximity with the agitators that were putting on gas masks, ballistic vests. They were armed. There was a man with a .223 rifle in the crowd. There was a man with a handgun on his side. And I believe we have a picture of that to show folks. In Denver, the shots were fired in the crowd. In Louisville, the same night of our protest, someone was shot and killed. We had hatchet attacks in Denver on people. Protesters that were there peacefully were attacked by this antagonist group. And so the concern was increasingly getting bigger for me, especially when I had direct communication with the people in the crowd that were telling me they are talking about storming the building. They were trying to take the advantage of this peaceful vigil and the violin situation going on is a perfect time to assault and take the building. They had knocked the fence down 3 times throughout the day. We tried to de-escalate. We'd come out of the way. We'd give orders because we know that we have to give these orders. It's what is expected, that people are told, you must stop doing what you're doing. Please, abide by what we're asking you to do. And it was done in both English and Spanish. And I know there was a comment of that, and perhaps that individual, did not hear the orders. Commander Redfern is fluent in Spanish, and he was the one giving the orders in both English and Spanish repeatedly. I want to let you know that prior to all this beginning, we did a sweep of the Great Lawn, looking to protect those that were coming that day, looking for explosive devices or anything that was stashed by the antagonizers that we knew were coming. And we found a stockpile of rocks. We also found water bottles full of urine. Across the country, officers have been, when we talk about being hit with water bottles, there have been people that have put flammable liquid and gasoline in these things to throw on officers, and then they throw, and we saw this in Denver, they throw fireworks to try and cause an explosion. So it was a heightened sense of stress with those water bottles, not knowing exactly what was in them. So that was also part of my thought process. And so I just wanted to make sure that people knew there was a man walking around with a hammer. So these are not people that are here to peacefully protest when they're showing up with weapons of that nature. We had people, our undercovers saw people pulling pipes out of their backpacks, and then of course the rock distribution. So I just don't want everybody to focus on rocks. And when I think a gentleman earlier had made a comment, the rocks shouldn't be it. And you're absolutely right, sir. I mean, my officers aren't sacrificial lambs. They're human beings. They're fathers, their mothers, their sisters, their brothers. And, they shouldn't be hit with anything because they're there to protect people. But you're correct that a rock solely should not be something that we would respond to with force. But when people are taking officers' batons, that we'll get into trying to disarm them with their baton and throwing things, that was very concerning to me. So I'll give it back to you.
So if we can move the forwards to the photos, I think we have some photos that will describe what I've been talking about, some examples. So here's some people in front of the museum. You can see, helmets. Two wearing ones that actually they're both wearing goggles of some type of face shield and helmets. These are not indicative of peaceful protesters. We've been frequently asked, why did we have officers in riot gear? And here we have an example of folks that were there apparently were being told for peaceful protest, but yet they're wearing protective gear. So can you move forward? Another slide. Again, another example, goggles, helmet, go forward, gloves, forward. I'm not sure, Steve, this is your photo. What is this of?
So this gentleman was one of several in the crowd. As you look with his left hand, he's holding up a metal shield. That metal shield had sharpened edges. Before this picture was taken, this gentleman was holding the shield up and actually using it to defend himself, using it to come at officers as we were trying to push the crowd out onto the lawn. There was this gentleman and two others that had those metal shields. You can see pepper foam being deployed in this area, and he's actually using that shield up to protect himself so that foam does not hit him. He also had a gas mask, ballistic looking helmet, and some other protective gear. And he had actually, before this photo was taken, was coming directly at the line of officers with that metal shield that could easily cause harm.
So from a timing standpoint, understand that photos were not chronologically, I haven't reached this point yet in what was going on, but this is an example of what we were seeing. Can you go forward one more? Again, another example of helmets, face shields, goggles. I thought there was a picture of a pile of rocks. Can you move forward?
It's further.
Oh, this is a flag, Antifa flag. Again, this supported the intel that we had received that there was going to be people that were identifying with Antifa groups that had planned to attend, that we were concerned with. And here was an example of somebody, whether it was those individuals or not, this is somebody waving an Antifa flag. This flag, this individual later used the flagpole to jam it into the chest or stomach of our officers as we were advancing. Can you go forward again? This is the subject that Chief Wilson was talking about. One of the armed subjects that we were aware of. This, this is an open carry state. So from the standpoint of this being a crime, we weren't concerned, but it was obviously a potential threat to us. And this individual was later one of the people that was up on the elevated area by the southwest corner of the museum.
And this person's actions specifically climbed a 6-foot brick fence and got high ground on my officers. And this was right prior to us saying, okay, we've got to do something. And then we were being told by the person in the crowd, they're talking about rushing the building. So go ahead.
And then forward, please. So here, this is a couple different views. The view on the left is a space between the museum and the wall that is on the side of the ramp, the wheelchair ramp that goes up to the entrance to the museum. It's kind of above our courtyard. That clearly is a pile of rocks. Those are river rocks that used for landscaping all around the Great Lawn. These have been piled up. Not sure by who or why. My guess is it might have been the construction crew that was working on the museum area there. But at any rate, these rocks are probably a little bit larger than, well, they vary, but about softball size, baseball to softball size. So these are much different than the small river rock that a lot of us have in our landscaping around our homes. These ones are big enough to throw by an adult and can cause obviously some serious damage. So these were of great concern. These were in very close proximity to the folks that were on that elevated area, very close to us. The other view on the right is the bicycle fencing that we had set up that is looking into our courtyard. So this would have been the view that the demonstrators had of us. Obviously, we're not in that photo, but That's the bicycle fencing that was set up after we had doubled it up, and it was defeated, knocked over, and that's what they were standing on for a very long time. And then I don't know if there's any more photos past that. Okay.
Do you want to go back in time?
Yeah, so we can use, and I'm sorry, Steve. Can we just go back a couple slides to?
We have the capability to show them.
Yeah, while you're looking, Steve, do we have the ability to show any of those videos that I sent?
Apologies.
Okay, I'll talk about this.
8 o'clock, Steve, the previous slide.
Go back one slide, Steve, please. There we go.
Thank you.
So I also neglected to mention during this time when we were developing the plan to move past our fences and get it set up again, take the area, the elevated area by the museum, we made the decision to give dispersal orders. And you have them. Yeah. So just so I get it right, the dispersal orders we gave, and it was Commander Redford gave in English and Spanish. Were the Aurora Police Department has determined this event threatens the safety of persons and property. Everyone is ordered to leave the area and disperse immediately. This is now an unlawful assembly. Please exit in an orderly and peaceful manner. We gave that repeatedly, and we gave ample time to give the folks opportunity to actually disperse. And I know that there's been question about why we felt dispersal orders were appropriate. And again, I feel like I've explained that, but the important line from this is the threatens safety of persons and property. Again, people in goggles, face shields, helmets, donning gloves, carrying rocks, picking up rocks, dispersing rocks. We saw a person with a lacrosse stick, which we know from experience is a very effective tool to not only throw rocks or anything else, but is also used frequently. We've seen it in other events like in Denver, where when smoke or gas or anything, any of those types of munitions are used to throw back at the police. So all of those things gave us concern for the safety of persons, not only ourselves, but other folks that were in that group up by the line, that were being verbal, but we're also responsible for their safety, and then the safety of property. Obviously, our concern if these groups that we had intel on were successful in getting into that area, if their intent was to take the police department or damage the police department, vandalize it, burn it. I mean, who knows what? We've seen that around the country. So those were part of our thought process.
If I can I add one thing to that? In addition to those orders that we just read, each time we read those, it was also included that if you remained in the area after dispersal was given, that you were subject to arrest and/or potentially deployment of less lethal chemical munitions.
So then I just want to explain something about the protection of property. So I need people to understand that the police department headquarters, which is what we're in now and what we're talking about, actually houses our evidence department. So all cases from homicides, sex assaults, crimes against children, you name it, our evidence is in this building. And so for us to lose this building to fire, or things that we've seen in Minneapolis or Seattle where they overtook the police department, could ruin tens of thousands of cases, both the 18th Judicial District as well as the 17th Judicial District. And cases and trials would be lost if we did not have that. We also had people working within the building, and so their safety was also paramount for me. I now want to shift to the second event. So there was this issue that we're dealing with where people were purposely gearing up to fight with the police, and that's as simple as I can put it. At the same time, this peaceful protest with the violence is going on, and people, and I understand, and I've had conversation upon conversation. I've racked my brain, gone backward, looked at, okay, what could I have done better? And I know that there's improvements that I can make and in the future, and that this department can make. So please hear me when I say this, that with and hopefully we have video that we can show you, but when the officers are marching out by the peaceful protesters, we made that decision to protect them because we knew that it was about ready to kick off with the people that had intent and were arming themselves. And so my division chief came up with a plan of, let's protect them. Let's put a line around them to try and separate them. I am sure, and now, of course, it's crystal clear at this point, right, days later, that caused panic. And they were like, what is going on? And there is a woman that was yelling, no, 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 because she didn't know what was going on. And so I failed to communicate with that group on what was going on. Had I decided to go out there or send someone as a messenger of some sort to try and communicate better, that's on me. I should have let them know what the intent was. But if you watch the video, and please look closely, we are surrounding them and our backs are to them because we're trying to protect them from what we knew was going to probably start with the people that wanted to fight with the police and to storm the building. And so I own that, and I'm deeply concerned that children were frightened by that. And the reason they were in riot gear is because of the things, the pipes, the guns, the sticks, the lacrosse sticks, the shields, everything that the small group of agitators were wearing. I could not send my officers out there without that protection. So I just really want to say that this was two events. This was an amazing, peaceful event going on. I agree with everyone. And that at the same time, we have this other issue happening and simultaneously. And I don't believe that wasn't by design by those people. I truly believe that they took the opportunity to wait for that. I talked to activists on the phone throughout the day, and one of them said, I think you're going to have problems later. And I said, I'm fearful, and I hope not, but we did. And so with that, I think, do we have anything else? We'll show the videos, please.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I think it's important to understand that our officers, that this was not in any way a reaction because we or our officers had lost patience, or that we were concerned with all of the people that were there. We were concerned with a very relatively small group of people in comparison to the number of people that were there, essentially doing the right thing. Whether we liked what they were saying or not, to us, that's their right. And we didn't have an issue with that. Our plan was in response to what we felt was an imminent threat by these people that I've described, based on all the things that I've described in the photos I've showed you, videos and body cams that will all be available later. So our officers were out there for something like 7.5 hours before we moved out onto the Great Lawn. So this was not an easy decision. It was just something that we didn't make lightly. But we thought about how we could do it, achieve what we needed to achieve to increase the safety for everyone out there, and also try to protect those that were up by the closer to the AMC steps where the violinists were, and clearly protect them. So
I know people are going to have questions, council members, so we'll go ahead, if that's okay, and show the videos if it's possible to get them on to run.
And everyone, this is Steve. Hopefully you can hear me. So we came up with a way, I think, to show the videos. So if you'll bear with us, we'll go ahead and give it a try. So if everyone who's on the call will zoom in into my screen and make sure that's your display screen. It should be, because I'm talking right now. You'll see a monitor here. I've got the videos loaded, and if you'll just tell me which one you want played, I'll play them one by one. So I can read them off to you, but I don't know if you can read them, but there's
I think just go through them.
We'll try to I guess we can try to go chronologically. Do you see one called knocking the fence over?
I do. We can start with that one. That'll test out. I think it's going to work. Let me go ahead and start that. Give me 1 second.
Thank you, Stephen.
Of course.
Okay. And then, I'm sorry, can you show me the list again so I can?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that obviously the video you just saw was before we made, that was sort of the prelude to the entire fence getting knocked over for the final time. So then you'll see, can you go to bottle off the helmet?
Yes, sir.
This one's fairly short. Okay, it's I'm sorry, it's difficult to see in there, but that's an example of while our officers were still in the courtyard, you can clearly see what we believe to be a water bottle come in and hit off that officer. You can hear it and see it hit off the top of that officer's helmet. List again, please.
And I know this is probably very difficult for those of you at home or even for council, and we can make a link available as well. And we did give body-worn camera.
These are all in that YouTube.
Okay, yeah, and we gave body-worn camera footage to the all media outlets yesterday.
Okay, there's one that says grabbing baton. This is you'll see a female that's grabbing an officer's baton, and then a subject comes in. Oh, you can't see it. I apologize. Yeah, we're getting a really bad glare off of that. So I don't know if you can adjust either your monitor or the camera that you're using.
Yeah, let me
get a different angle.
So play that again.
Yeah. Yes.
High-tech wizardry here.
See if maybe that's a little better. I'll try playing that one again.
Okay. Okay, well, what you probably weren't able to make out in that is there was a female that was engaged with one of our officers. Actually, he had his baton, kind of a horizontal defensive posture, and she had grabbed onto that at some point. And he was somewhat of a wrestling match, trying for him to retain his baton. And there's an individual that comes around, comes up over the top of a person you see in the foreground and throws what we later learned is an umbrella, a folded up umbrella, directly at one of our officers from a few feet away. And then we might as well try to see if the other videos play, the one that Chief Wilson was describing with the violinist.
As you can see, the officers' backs are to these individuals. They're not a threat. They were in a protect them from what was coming across the lawn. Coming. The issue was people were confused. I acknowledged that and fearful and didn't understand what was going on, and I apologize profusely for that. But that my intent was to do everything I could to keep that peaceful group, the violent vigil, completely separate as best I could from what was happening in front of the police station. So
and then and I'll offer just one more thing, unless there's something you want me to add, because I know there was questions. I've heard comments and questions about water bottles and why are we threatened by water bottles? And I will tell you that if we know that it's a plastic water bottle that is actually filled with water, we're not, as a practical matter, we're not that threatened by it, especially if we're wearing protective gear. The problem is, I guess there's 2 points I want to make on that. The problem is we don't always know if they're plastic. We don't always know what they contain, and they're not always plastic. We did find the heavier sort of thermal type containers that were thrown. And then the other point I would make about that is, while we might not be physically threatened by a plastic water bottle that's full of water, it is a demonstration of somebody's intent, a demonstration of willingness, an escalation, if you will, of violence by at least one individual in that group, or however many individuals threw things at us. So that's the concern. It's not so much the water bottle itself.
And then I think it's really important to talk about the substance that's in it. We have seen flammable liquids. If you go and if you Google some of these groups, acid, you name it, what they could throw on officers trying to harm them. So the psychological fact of the officers and what is hitting them at that moment as well. What has just been thrown on me? So I really want to remember that we are human beings, and we're subject to the same stressors and the same fear that everyone else is. Along the line, I just want to say that when we held the line, when the group was pushed, and the gentleman had a great question earlier, why did we not de-escalate? We were attempting to be able to pull the officers back safely. I had 4 officers that were taken to the hospital, 3 for severe dehydration, 1 for chest pains, and he ended up having pulmonary embolisms. We don't know if it was the heat or the fact that he was standing or what was going on with that, but he's going to be all right. But it was, while we were waiting, there were conversations, and there were pictures that actually the media in the Denver Post, I don't know if it's the Denver Post, so I apologize to the Denver Post if I got it wrong, but there were pictures of our officers that people actually took photos with them after those conversations, and we're still engaging in conversation, and we had to say, okay, come on, let's go. I know you might be having a good conversation, but we need to get back. We need to go back. And so we were trying to come up with a plan to do that peacefully. When we did that, there was still a group that came towards us again, and but we just continued to go ahead and retreat back to the police station. But I want to share with everyone, and First Amendment speech is that. But I want to point out that my officers are human beings, and that especially my officers of color stood on that line. They were spit in the face. People told them to kill themselves. People told them use racial slurs against them, and I find that extremely ironic. But my officers were the officers of color were particularly berated by the crowd, and it's just very sad to see. And those officers actually came off the line and wept. And I met with them and talked with them, and they couldn't believe what they had just gone through. So yes, it's a First Amendment right, but I just want everyone to know what they went through. So with that, I just want to open it up to you, Mayor, how you would like to go from here, sir.
Very well. I will recognize myself first, and then I recognize other members of the council. Chief, I want to appreciate your efforts and your honesty. The vulnerable point, as I see it, is that quadrangle in front of the entrance to the police station. And having bicycle fencing there, didn't seem to be much of a deterrent. And I know that you did the best you could in terms of not exposing officers to the protesters, because I think you assume that would create issues in and of themselves, a confrontation. Would it be in moving forward in terms of that vulnerable area where you had to expose officers? Would it be better to have a more significant barrier, temporary barrier that could be erected there, like a HESCO barrier that in the Marine Corps we use for force protection, to really protect that area, or did you need an open avenue for your officers to be able to respond?
So I think, sir, that, and I think Councilmember Marcano and Councilmember Coombs, we had talked on the phone throughout the day, and people did respond when they saw officers. It did agitate them. So yes, if there was something that obviously we don't want the police department to look like a fortress. So if there's something that we can be put up temporarily, Deputy City Manager Batchelor and Deputy City Manager Freed have already come and talked to me. We walked the area. We talked about what that would look like, sir. So it's a great suggestion. And I believe city management is doing everything they can to facilitate that. And I know Mr. Batchelor is on the phone. I don't know if he wants to talk about it at all. On this meeting. But yes, sir, that would very much help in the future, but it has to be something that can't be breached. The issue is if people were rushed into that small area, I think things would escalate even greater. The spread out into the Great Lawn, these agitators don't want to be seen. They duck behind a lot of people when they throw something and then duck. And so once we spread that line, things calm down because those people got out of there because they will be easily identifiable to us at that point to be able to arrest them for their behavior. So yes, so there's an issue of bringing all that right into that small space, as well as it's a great suggestion, and I know the city management is already working on that, sir, to get something different in the future.
Okay. Questions? Councilmember Combs.
So, I appreciate you guys clarifying some information, but I still find myself left with some questions.
Yes, ma'am.
Having been there, particularly with respect to the intel and what it seemed like to me in both our briefing and everything that you said was a desire to disperse at dark kind of no matter what, because there was an assumption that there was going to be violence once the sun went down. And there was a constant theme that there's going to be violence, really bad violence, once the sun went down. So I know that your intel officers contacted the parents of youth protesters and asked them not to be there, and told them that they would be held responsible should anything happen. So if there was knowledge that things were expected to be shut down after dark, why wasn't the conversation then to those of us that were there and to the violin vigil folks to not be there? Because we had a conversation with Deputy City Manager Batchelor that they could kind of be wherever they wanted on the grounds. So if there was a sense that this type of thing was likely to happen, why wasn't the direction given to, hey, it really would be best if you actually stayed down in that park, even though it's not an ideal space?
So, ma'am, first of all, I want to agree with you. The communication needs to be better, and I promise to do better in the future. But what I would say is that wasn't a predetermined decision that at nighttime this was going to happen. This was dictated by what the agitators were doing. And then I was going off of history just recently in Denver of when nightfall hit, that is when really chaos hit. And so I had that in my mind as well with everything that we saw was escalating, passing out rocks, those types of things. And I know people are saying they didn't see that. Well, they were not in a proximity to see that. And we have, we're gonna get all the body-worn camera footage so people can see. And I apologize that this video was very poor tonight, but we will get those videos out. And again, they were given to the media. And if you watched the news last night, you may have seen it there as well. But we'll make sure that we get that a link for everyone to see a full YouTube of that. So it wasn't a predetermined decision, ma'am. And we did try to reach out to the contacts that we had. Obviously, the PSL group and the Denver Communists were not interested in engaging in communication with us. And we thought, and I had even reached out to you to help me communicate with the kids that were coming because I was concerned. And so, yes, we did not have a contact for whoever created the violin vigil. And we also had information the violin vigil was moving to the GEO, and obviously that was false information. So that we they ended up showing up at AMC. So hopefully that answers your question. It wasn't predetermined.
Okay, and then following up on the point about recent history, recent history has shown to protesters that they are likely to experience tear gas and pepper spray and other chemical agents, as well as other physical confrontation. So I just want to clarify why protective equipment like helmets and like this mask here, which I was wearing under my bandana because of coronavirus and the density of the crowd, are seen as violence in the face of even more armed people, or as an indication that violence will happen and that people aren't peaceful, because that was mentioned repeatedly during this presentation. And I think people have a right to protect themselves with protective equipment.
Yes, ma'am, they do. They can wear helmets if they'd like. Every other rally or demonstration that I've seen here on the Great Lawn, no one showed up in that outfit. And so they also didn't have pulling pipes out of their backpacks or passing out rocks. So that's the things I'm focusing on. And I'm just pointing out that we were identifying these groups of people that were wearing that here were also the ones pulling out pipes, were also the ones passing out rocks. So they weren't just standing there and enjoying the violin show and listening to the violin peacefully. They were engaged in communication, and we had undercovers next to them. We heard their conversations. They were engaged in planning violence. So,
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Further questions? Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Who's that? Councilmember Gruber. I'm sorry. I don't see your picture up there.
Okay, Chief, if I could, I understand that there was intelligence. I'm a military guy, so I'm not going to ask you to divulge sources and methods, but it seemed rather severe in that not only the city of Aurora, but Arapahoe County decided to board up their windows. So did you at the time believe that that was an appropriate response for the intelligence you had?
Yes, sir. Due to the fact that for those of you that know the AMC campus, there is a lot of glass. A lot of damage could occur, and the buildings could be compromised by a Molotov cocktail, which we failed to mention earlier. We believe we have I don't know, do we actually have pictures of it, or was it just
no? I don't think we have it.
Okay, but those were used. IEDs and Molotov cocktails were used in the Denver riots. To start fires, dumpster fires throughout the city. And so I felt as though I needed to let city management know, and I called each council member to let them know what I was facing and what I was concerned about prior to Saturday's event.
If I could follow on just another point. You had made the, you talked earlier about the march down Alameda and the march down 225. Was that coordinated with you, or how was the safety of the marchers, both on the state road Alameda as well as the federal road, taken care of? Was that coordinated? So that was something you knew about?
They had said that they wanted to march. I didn't know exactly where they were going to go. They didn't give me a route or anything. So it was very organic how that evolved. And so our officers just sort of fluidly went with them. And once we knew they were headed towards the highway, we had our CSP partners go ahead and shut down.
CSP is Colorado Highway Patrol?
Colorado State Patrol, sir. Yes, sir. We had them shut down the highway and redivert traffic so that we didn't have, other citizens of Aurora, residents of Aurora being delayed due to that. And they may need to get to a hospital or get to some function that they need to be to, or even work. And so we made sure that we diverted people off the highway so they didn't get stuck in the middle of that. So, and also I really was, I was concerned. You see things across the nation where even in Denver, someone was struck with a vehicle as they took the street. So I wanted to make sure that didn't happen here.
So, okay. Thank you for protecting the people.
Thank you, sir.
Further questions?
Yes, sir, yes. Mayor.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, sir. I have a lot of questions, but to be fair to my colleagues here, I'll just do them one at a time. So first, I want to start with the barrier. So I've spoken with former APD officers, sergeants, and such who have expressed to me that using barricades actually just creates an objective to struggle over during these kinds of events and becomes a point of contention, especially for agitators. It is not a de-escalation technique. So how do you all train to deal with crowd control and the use of these barriers?
If I may, council member, I don't know who you spoke to, and we don't have extensive training as far as barriers, but I can tell you that part of our training when it comes to individual officer safety, things like responding to threats from people with weapons like bats or edged weapons and things like that, is to actually put a barrier up between us, rather than have no barrier where we might be forced to take some sort of higher level of use of force. In other words, if I'm within a short distance from somebody that's armed with a weapon and I have no barrier between me and them, I might be forced to defend myself in some manner. Whereas if there's a barrier between us, that gives me time and distance to react to that in some sort of way that might not be as high an escalation of force.
Further questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I want to better understand when you showed the map with most of the protesters, peaceful protesters that were there, for Elijah McClain, with the stage closer to the municipal building, where you say usually the speakers would be. So do you feel like that was really where the majority of the peaceful protesters congregated, and where you had the barrier obviously was a barrier to the police headquarters, the courts, and then the police headquarters, because you did have intel stating that was possibly a target, and obviously our police headquarters contains evidence for rapes and for different crimes that we really need to protect, as well as just the physical building. So would you say that your officers were aware of the agitators wanting to get to the police headquarters, and that's why the fence was put at that particular location?
Yes, ma'am. I didn't want to just make it easy to run into the police agency. So we put those barriers up, and I would agree with Commander Parker that we are looking at a better way next time. It was a bicycle fence that they compromised and were intentionally taking apart. So and when you say peaceful protesters, ma'am, even the people that were yelling at the police station, they were peaceful. They were just chanting and yelling and letting their voices be heard. So when I say the agitators, I'm talking about specifically the people I'm showing the pictures of, those individuals, the people that were chanting and yelling and doing those things. They had the right to do all those things. So that was peaceful. That was also peaceful. When I say the violin vigil was extremely peaceful, those were families sitting on the lawn enjoying music. And so there were peaceful people throughout that day for hours and hours and hours. It was just the specific antagonists that came and supported that.
So real quick, two more quick questions. So no tear gas was dispersed. It was pepper spray and then a smoke canister that just makes smoke. It's not actual tear gas.
Correct. Smoke canisters, no tear gas, CS gas was deployed in that crowd, but pepper spray was, and pepper spray it's pepper. It's oleogens and capsicum, and it burns the eyes and makes your sinuses and eyes water.
Okay, and then my final question is on the order to disperse. That was given, I think I heard you say multiple times in English as well as in Spanish. Once those orders were given multiple times, did most people follow the orders or not? And I guess that's when you started to have the rocks thrown and water bottles and more of that type of action happening. So do you feel that you gave adequate notice to disperse?
I think we gave multiple, I would guess probably 50 different announcements to disperse. And then before that, just please do not touch the fence, do not cross the fence, leave the fence alone, those things throughout the day. And so I do wish that I could go back in time and communicate with the very extremely peaceful people and let them know what was going on. And so I own that, as I've said to everyone here tonight, so that they weren't scared or confused of what our intent was, what my intent was, which was to protect. But yes, the people on the line in front of the police department, many, many orders, and some, yes, some left, and I thank them for leaving the situation.
Further questions?
Mayor, Angela.
Councilmember Lawson.
Chief, I have a question. You said that you used the pepper spray and then you used the smoke. My question is how come the smoke couldn't just be what you used instead of, why did the pepper spray have to come into it? Because it seems like smoke kind of would push people back. So why was there a need of pepper spray? And then I saw in a video that one of the officers, and maybe the person was an agitator or not, but was directly hit with pepper spray. I mean, just directly hit in the face with pepper spray. So I'm trying to understand the technique of this. You use the pepper spray, then you use the smoke, but why wouldn't the smoke be maybe a deterrent first before you use pepper spray?
So I'm going to ask the commander that was on the, division chief that was on the ground, and the commander can, if we have additional questions, can answer that. But I'll give that to Division Chief Parker. And I believe the smoke was deployed first, but it would happen very, very quickly, ma'am. And then for the spray is intended to direct it at a specific individual or individuals, and so it is supposed to make contact with them. So.
You stole my answer.
I'm sorry.
But I will say she's correct. There was smoke deployed. Smoke is inert. There's no chemical in it. It's got various uses. But for our purposes, during that event, it was intended to hopefully disperse the crowd. Not to intimidate or frighten, but hopefully people would see, smoke and they would say, okay, they would then leave when they would see the dispersal of the smoke. We did have one of them, that was one of the videos that we didn't show, but just like we had seen in Denver and other places around the country, one of those smoke canisters was thrown back at our officers, almost hit one of our officers in the head. And they're fairly heavy, they're metal, they're fairly heavy. So that was the deployment of the smoke, and the intention of that was really just to try to get more people to disperse without actually subjecting them to any kind of a chemical like CS or CM. The OC was used more defensively by individuals for example, when we had people that were refusing to comply with the officer's orders that would actually grab their batons. We had several examples of that. That's where the OC was used, isolated to those individuals that were taking action against our officers, grabbing their batons.
Or breaching.
I'm sorry, what is OC again?
Oleoresin capsicum. It's a
pepper spray.
It's basically pepper spray.
Okay.
It's an irritant. It's very uncomfortable. It's intended to be that way. But I can tell you that, we use it in training our officers. All of our officers are required to be subjected to it and go through a series of, physical maneuvers to show that they can still function if they were exposed to it. Because we have found over time that even when our officers have used it, that it's not uncommon for our officers to be exposed to it themselves, either because of overspray or bounces. And so there were cases during this incident where officers used the OC spray directed at individuals, and it is very likely that some of that spray got onto people who was unintended. Small amounts of it, whether it was deflected or the people moved, and the spray then hit somebody else. But that's the use of the of the smoke and of the OC.
Further questions?
Yes, sir.
Mayor, I have a question.
Councilmember Marcano, and then Councilmember Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor. So as I think as was mentioned earlier, I was there basically the entire day. So early on during the day, I was on the line on the gate, and PD kept issuing warnings for protesters to remain beyond the bicycle fencing that was put up on the courtyard, but no one was beyond the fencing. And every time that order was issued, the crowd got more riled up and angrier. And eventually you did pull back the SWAT officers there, or not SWAT, rather, the ERT officers there, and things calmed down a bit. But I just want to know, why did that why was that allowed to go on for 20 or 30 minutes and just build tensions, and then everyone just got pulled back?
So, sir, in no disrespect, but I have a different recollection of that. I was standing.
I have photos and video, but go ahead. Standing
on the elevated area above and watching all of that. And so I guess perhaps it's semantics when you say nobody went beyond. We gave several orders for people not to touch the fencing, not to stand on the fencing or sit on the fencing, and yet they continued to do it. And we did have people over to the west side that were by the courthouse that did move beyond. They just simply moved the fencing itself. And so they stayed behind the fencing that they moved, but they moved the fencing beyond where the fencing was originally put. So I would tell you that that was my direct observation, and I am certain that we have body cam to support that. And as far as why we continued to let it go on, was we felt that we were getting compliance in the sense that people were sort of, pushing the envelope, and then they would move back, and then they would push the envelope, and they would move back. So that answers your question.
Sort of. And I also want to say I really need y'all to release all of the footage, because the bit that you released, I believe, was something that was already shared with the media. I'm familiar with it. I've also watched about 3 hours of footage from various vantage points from the people that were there. Everyone has a camera anymore, right? So I have a lot more questions that will follow up with this. But I just need to restate that the most effective thing y'all did earlier in the day was pull back. That de-escalated people, and the agitators got bored and left. So I need to see more of that. Thank you.
Further questions?
Mayor, I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Gardner.
Thank you. So it kind of piggybacks, I guess, a little bit on what Councilmember Marcano just said. There were several things relayed in the presentation. An individual that was carrying a handgun that had scaled a wall, racial slurs at officers, and several things like that. And so I'm just curious, are we in the process of either looking through security footage from the AMC campus, body cam from the officers, and things like that? Because I think we really need to, in the interest of full disclosure and transparency, right, we need to make sure that we release as much footage as possible to support the positions that we're taking. I'd like to see more than 3 minutes released. I know there's hours and hours and hours of video that exist just in body cams, not to mention the security footage. But we obviously had some pretty high resolution photographs, and so I would expect there would be additional video that would support some of the things we're talking about. And even on this call tonight, there seems to be some dispute as to what happened at different points in the evening, what happened before and after the dispersal order, and those types of things. And so I would imagine that we would have video to support all that. And so my question is basically, are we in the process of reviewing that video and planning on releasing more? Because I would like to see that. I think from a transparency standpoint, we owe that to the community.
Yes, sir. We are. The officers that were there that evening are on days off. We ordered several of them in to come and dock their cameras. It has to dock their camera, it has to upload. I'm not a technological whiz here. But yes, I have no problem releasing all the body-worn camera footage. And we have had requests, and my executive officer, unfortunately, is not here right now. But I believe that our open records, the person that deals with any core request or open records request, we talked about it earlier today of how do we get that out to the people, to the media that's specifically asking, and we're thinking it's so large. There's hundreds of hours of body-worn camera to how are we going to do that? And so putting it on discs, unedited, and I agree, sir. 3 minutes is not enough to show what happened, and we literally were on a time crunch to. I had interview requests coming in from every news station, radio stations, and so at the same time, my people were downloading stuff and getting it, and then trying to just give something that obviously the media can't show hours of footage. They needed something very concrete and condensed. So, but we absolutely, it'll all be given.
Great, appreciate it.
Further questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
Chief, I've got a couple of more questions for you. I'll do these just real quick. But did you observe people bringing in rocks in their backpacks?
I personally did not observe it, but I was told through my officers and my undercover and also the people that had Overwatch that had binoculars that yes, that was occurring.
All right. Then did your officers report bringing in milk, which is known to diffuse pepper spray?
They reported that people were pouring white liquid into bottles, sir. So
okay.
I can't assume what it was. It could possibly be milk, yes.
Okay. Did you observe protesters marked with homemade red crosses setting up what appeared to be combat first aid stations like those that were built or set up in the Denver riots?
I did see people that had medic symbols, but again, if someone else can answer that.
Answer that, Chief.
Go ahead.
Sir, we did have people in the crowd with those symbols, and at least on 2 or 3 occasions, as I was behind the line observing the teams, when pepper spray was deployed, I heard people yelling medic, medic, and then a group of people would come over, and I didn't really see what they did, but they came, and these are members of the crowd, came to assist the people that had been pepper sprayed.
Okay, then if I could, so in other words, there were people that were prepared to be sprayed, and they had a combat support system to make that, to cover those people, to help those people. So, and to go a little bit further, so you observed a subset of agitators, and again, this isn't everybody, this is a subset of agitators, had helmets, eye shields, projectiles, combat first aid, milk, and pepper spray, or the milk to counteract pepper spray. And I think that's what you just said. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so then based on your professional opinion and the opinion of your officers, did you believe that they were preparing for conflict against the Aurora Police Department?
Yes, sir, I was, and undercovers directly heard that conversation.
Thank you.
Preparing that. Thank you.
Further questions?
Mayor?
Yes.
Councilmember Coombs.
So I would just like to clarify that protest medics are not a violation of free speech or of peacefulness. If people have a credible and reasonable fear, which I think they do, of the potential use of chemical agents and other potential harm, they have the right to receive care for that. And protest medics also do things like provide people with hydration and food. And it was an incredibly hot day. I myself had to leave because I was becoming dehydrated and starting to suffer from heat exhaustion, and then had to come back after I addressed that. So I just want to be really clear that there is no reason to treat the presence of protest medics as a reason for escalating force. And I would like to clarify, Chief, was that a reason that your officers chose to escalate force?
Oh, ma'am, and no, that was not a reason why to escalate force. I to your point, it was a very hot day. My officers suffered dehydration. I can understand that people would bring, if they feel that they need to have, somebody falls out from heat stroke or something, that they can assist them. So it is not something that would create me to believe, yes, that's the answer. Medics are not anything that would create my decision to act.
Okay. And then as another question that I had is, you guys are talking about the use of pepper spray to disperse the crowd. And so my two questions are, how frequently does the use of chemical agents and non-penetrative rounds disperse and de-escalate rather than escalating a situation? And then when a person is on the ground and running away after having pepper spray sprayed on them, is it the policy of the department to continue following that person and continuing to spray them?
If the threat has ceased to present itself, then it would not be the policy to continue to spray someone that is running away. So to that question and your first question, sorry, I kind of lost it listening throughout. What was your first question, ma'am?
How frequently does the use of chemical agents and non-penetrative munitions lead to a de-escalation and dispersal rather than an escalation of conflict?
I would say that's subjective and to that individual person. Many times it ends anyone from continuing their behavior, and they will usually run away.
And what about the other surrounding persons in the crowd? Does it tend to?
I can't say, ma'am. It's going to be case by case, and so I'm not sure how to answer that question for you.
Okay.
Mayor.
Further questions,
Yes.
Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you. Can you, Chief Wilson, can you talk about ignoring an order to disperse? Is that a crime?
It's a failure to obey a lawful order, yes, ma'am.
So failure to obey a lawful order, what normally would there be a consequence to that?
Yes, it would be an arrest. And there were several people that we did not arrest. There were 2 people that we did arrest that were male, and they had, one was from Westminster and one was from Glenwood Springs. So these weren't people that, live in Aurora. But several arrests we did not make. That wasn't going to help the situation at all at that point. And we didn't want to escalate it any further.
And any citizen of Aurora would, anybody would have to follow that order. No one is excused or above the law in that sense.
Ma'am, if an officer gives a lawful order, it is a crime to disobey it.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Mayor?
Who is it? Sorry.
Councilmember Marcano.
Okay. Is it Mayor Pro Tem Johnson?
Thanks. I have something to say, and then I have a question. I know a lot of people are tuning in right now. I did not attend the protest, but I was on the phone a lot afterwards, during, on Monday, probably 6 hours of just various constituents, residents who were at the protest and shared a lot of the concerns of people who were speaking before our meeting. But I do want to say that this meeting tonight is a briefing to get information and share our questions, our concerns. But for those who are listening, I really appreciate Chief Wilson owning some of the things that could have been done better, and to assure folks that council, this isn't going to be the end of this discussion. We have a public safety policy committee. We have council members on it and not on it that want to continue these discussions on how we can prevent this from happening again. So I just want to bring that up to a lot of the people who are tuning in and watching it, that it will go beyond just tonight's discussion. But Chief Wilson, I'd like to ask about the communication piece. And I know with some of the previous protests that we had, there was some communication with the actual protesters and the city in terms of what to expect. And I don't know if this is a question for you or maybe even our deputy city manager about, do we wait for folks to contact us to say we're going to do this protest? Or do we look at who could be organizing it? Is that a city role or an APD role of reaching out? And then also groups like KCRT that really have kind of a footprint in the community about even reaching out to them. If there's ever that decision, we have to reach out to them before protests, or again, if that's moving forward, that we need to do that. So I just want to get an idea of that. If there is a system, what that is right now, and your thoughts on that, if that's more of a traditional city role or APD role.
So it's actually both, ma'am. A lot of times community relations group will be reached out to, Claudine McDonald will be reached out to, and she'll call me and say there's an event being planned, chief, and then also our intel unit will be given information, or they see on the internet or social media being tagged that people are coming to the city. So they're always looking for those types of things. And we do reach out. We try to reach out to the organizers and make, whether they agree with us, like us or not, we try to have that line of communication open. I know for Blackout 2020, I actually assigned an officer as a liaison to the organizer head that she could talk to no matter what was going on, that she could reach out to. And she was in contact with me as well as Claudine McDonald throughout that, letting me know what she was seeing, what she was concerned about, and what we could do to help. So obviously, I would say communication wouldn't have helped with the people that came to create havoc. It would have helped with the violin group and those parents and family members that were out there. And so, yeah, I'm open to any ideas. I'm looking forward to working with the community task force and how we deal with protests in the future, working with AKCRT and really moving forward and learning from all the comments and emotional responses that I heard tonight. It has a great impact on me. So thank you.
Further questions?
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you. Chief, could you please go into dispersal orders, how that intersects with the First Amendment, and what grounds are necessary to issue a lawful order to disperse?
Yes. So
that already, but
Councilman, I actually have my legal advisor here. Nancy, are you able to help out with that answer? We do have our dispersal orders that we read of what we obviously talked to our legal advisors prior to these. We show what the statements that were going to be made and make sure that they fall within free speech and making sure that legality is all covered in that. So I don't know if Ms. Rogers is able to help us out. I think she just sent an email. Oh, riot dispersal.
No, I'm here.
Okay, great.
I'm here.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate your help.
I'm here. Good evening, everyone. The chief is correct that I do spend a lot of time with command staff and incident command talking about this and focus on the behavior rather than the speech. There is a Colorado revised statute that makes it unlawful for any individual to disobey a reasonable request by an officer who orders somebody to leave an area in order to maintain safety by dispersing those gathered in dangerous proximity to fire, riot, or other hazard. And that's Colorado Revised Statute 189107. The case law on this, and what we've talked about frequently with incident command and command staff, is the case law supports that it is the police officer's call. It has to be a reasonable request, and of course reasonable tends to be one of those issues that are litigated. So the chief was talking about some of the behaviors that the officer witnessed to support their view that this was getting to riotous conditions that were unsafe for others. And then they made their choice to disperse the crowd based on those behavior observations.
All right, so follow up, can you tell me how exactly this intersects with the violin vigil that was happening, about 200 feet away from this area? And how this would apply to those folks there. And I ask because I was right there. The people in that crowd and myself, I don't think any of us felt unsafe until the riot police showed up. And then I saw grown adults cry and children run off screaming. So I need to understand the rationale to interrupt that vigil with riot police.
So, sir, I think I thought I had just talked about the two different groups that were going on, that this group was continuing its behavior. This group was, I don't know how I could allow this part of the lawn to stay and this part of the lawn to go. I really don't know how I could answer that question, sir. There was a situation unfolding in front of the police department that was increasingly dangerous for everyone there. And so that was my, so
I understand your frustration, but you said that they're two separate groups. So why did both have to be affected by the same order?
Sir, because it needed, the events on the Great Lawn as a whole needed to stop because they were just as much in danger as the officers or anyone else, as the people that were chanting peacefully as well, because of the choices made by the agitating group to engage with the police.
Okay. Chief, how many people were in this agitating group?
I don't have a number, sir. I would, I read a report that the Overwatch people saw about 50 folks that were engaging. I don't have that number, so please don't hold it to me. We can look through hours and hours of footage and I can try and count them, but it was a danger. It was a danger to those people.
Understood. How many ERT folks did we have out there?
Do you have a number for me?
We had 80 ERT officers.
We had 80 ERT officers, and then I had to call for additional officers from Arapahoe County, Adams County, and Jefferson County, and then I used Colorado State Patrol to shut down the highway for me. So total number of officers, do we know that we had on hand that day? 110? 110 officers that we could utilize.
Okay, Chief. The reason I'm asking this is because you had a fair amount of resources out there. I would expect with that amount of resources that y'all could find a way to keep one group separate from the other. I had constituents who were maced, who I know were not participating in any violent activities. I have constituents whose children are traumatized from this. And you heard from both of them in testimony earlier as well. So they're asking me these questions, and that's why I'm asking you these questions. What can we do better going forward?
I think I've said that we can do better in communication, that I could do better at talking to that group, sending officers out to try and figure out who the organizer is to get that message out. Maybe a bullhorn specifically to that group, things that could be done differently. I've owned that from the very beginning of this meeting, sir, and I those testimonies break my heart and affect me as a human being. But I did try to send a line to protect them.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Yes.
Councilmember Bergen.
Chief Wilson, in your professional opinion, whether you have 50 agitators, 10 agitators, 20 agitators, even one possibly, we have seen across our nation people that can create great amount of violence. So numbers, I would think numbers don't necessarily tell the story. It's the intent of the violence. Can you address that?
Yes, ma'am. The intent of the violence that we've seen across the country, that we've seen in Denver with people being attacked with hatchets, protesters turning on themselves, infighting amongst them, officers being sent to the hospital, protesters being sent to the hospital. This was because it was my job to try and do the best I could to stop what was happening.
Further questions?
Mayor Dave Gruber.
Councilmember Gruber.
Chief, a couple more questions, and thank you for taking this. I know how emotional it is. I know how I don't know, but I suspect I can understand both how the community and the police force is feeling right now. So when the police came out and you gave the lawful order, did most people follow police direction? Did most people start to back up and move into the south parking area?
And that's a really great point, sir. We were also putting out information on Twitter, and in the dispersal orders, they were saying if you want to leave, please to a safe place, please head to this part of the section. We were trying to communicate to people that wanted to leave where a safe direction was to head. So there were people that definitely listened, and there were people that were not listening at all.
Okay, and then just a couple more. The video, Channel 9 News had a helicopter up, and there are a lot of videos that were on Twitter and Facebook throughout the day. When the officers came out, I was kind of surprised. You had a line of officers come out, and they formed a north-south line, and it looked like, so, again, we should have saw the map earlier, but it looked like they formed a wall between the violinist and the socialist, where the Party for Socialism and Liberation was set up. It looked like they formed a wall, but it looked like all of the officers had their back to the violinist. Which again, it just seems unusual that you'd leave, people leave their backs undefended. Was that a choice? Was that something you requested the officers to do?
Yes, that was on purpose. We were trying to divide whatever was going to come out into the Great Lawn area. We were trying to protect those people, and that's why we gave them our back. We don't give our back to people that we were afraid of. They were not a threat to us. And so that is why we did that. And I can do better, and I've admitted that. And so, but that was my intent, sir. That was my intent, was to divide the groups.
Okay, and again, watching it through various sources, it seemed to me that I saw a line of officers that was east and west in front of the police headquarters, a police station, and they walked south towards the parking lot. I saw agitators, or I understand that there were protesters, agitators that were being pushed south, that swung around the officers that were protecting the violinists and the people listening and merged with them. Was that when you decided that the entire area had to be cleared?
I will give that to Division Chief Parker. He was actually on the lawn when that was happening, as well as Commander Redfern.
Yes, Councilmember, you're correct. There was a pause where we had sort of an L-shaped configuration of our ERT folks. The ones with the backs to the violinists, in an attempt to separate them from the folks that we considered were a problem. At some point, because we were unable to prevent those that had moved from the parking lot and again swung to the east around by AMC, and then, to use your words, merged in with I'm not even sure if the violinists were still there at that point. What I recall is that the violinists had actually moved to the parking lot because that's where I could hear the music coming up from at that point. And I didn't see anybody playing a violin anymore by the fountain kind of area. And so Commander Redfern and I talked about then moving that line around and joining it into one long line and then moving everybody south at that point.
Okay, and then my final question is that once the violinist had set up in the south parking lot, and that's the one, again, on your map, I won't try to describe it, but once they set up there, my understanding is that you provided police security to protect those people, and at that point in time, the agitators seemed to go away. So, and then the people that remained in the south parking lot were there to listen to the violinist and the other entertainers. Is that what you saw as well?
That is correct.
Okay, and then again, for those that are listening, I personally believe those violinists really saved the day. I mean, the fact that they were there, the fact that they kept people calm, the fact that they performed under very adverse conditions. I'm very pleased that they were there, and I'd like to thank them for being there that night.
Completely agree.
Further questions?
Mayor. I witnessed many violinists that did not seem to want to be separated off from the other people in attendance, and that were actually going up to the police line to play the violin, that believed in the free speech rights of the very many peaceful protesters that were there and that may have been out past the line that officers determined was to be set. So was there any consideration given to the possibility that separating out the two groups would actually increase escalation? And was the support of the violinists for the other folks that were there that were being treated as unlawful any part of the decision to disperse the violinists as well?
So the last part of your question cut out. but I think I got most of it. So no, we didn't consider that violinists would, want to, mix in with folks that we perceived as the problem. Although, our intent, as we've already said several times, was to put that line to protect them if they chose to be protected. Those that moved to the south and moved to the parking lot, if they eventually moved over and joined in with the other group, that is their right to do so. We weren't trying to prevent them from playing violins. We were trying to protect them. Now, moving forward and listening to your question and lessons learned, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from this and things that we'll take into consideration if we have future events like this, where we have simultaneous types of protests or demonstrations going on at the same time. We will definitely take all of this into consideration. So I appreciate your question, but no, we didn't think of that consideration at the time.
As a follow-up on that, I think it's fairly clear that the people who were there playing the violins were there due to concerns about the injustice in Elijah McClain's situation. And so it seems like a considerable amount of time was spent combing through Facebook posts and gathering intelligence ahead of time about what was being said. I know that the articles and posts that I saw on that subject matter were comments that were broadly expressing solidarity with the other protests, the student protests, as well as the other protests that were happening that day. So why weren't those lines drawn in intelligence between groups that were all acting in solidarity with each other and who expressed solidarity, right? The youth and the 1 p.m. protest actually released a post expressing their communication and solidarity with one another. And the Elijah McClain, the Vigil folks were expressing solidarity with the concerns expressed by those other groups. So I'm confused about how, as not even an intel officer, if I was able to see posts and draw those lines, why wasn't our intelligence also able to draw those lines of affinity between the groups?
Ma'am, I believe I had conversations with you a couple nights before it, and conversations with you that day. So yes, I knew that the youth were joining in the earlier protest. The violin group, I hope that in the future, if you all get intelligence, that you send it to me so that I can have all the information. And so, there's many different Facebook profiles and posts and sites. And so we can do the best that we can. I appreciate in the past when people have reached out to the city or the police department saying, chief and city, this is where we're coming. We would like this to be peaceful. And this is how we can work with you to create that peace. And so I don't know how to answer your question other than the fact that I thought I was communicating directly with you, and I thought that I communicated my concerns to council. And I have many times stated that I need to do better with trying to reach out to organizers that I don't know and groups that I didn't know that were going to be there, or what their intent was, or that they unified with another group that I didn't know they unified with.
Further questions? Councilmember Lawson.
Chief, I just have a question about the baton use and then the training on that. So when someone grabs the baton, why is it the first thing to strike versus push off?
So we teach baton retention training, ma'am, and obviously it just is going to depend on the strength of the person grabbing that baton, if they're able to push that person, or if they need to do a strike, and that is going to be that moment and that officer's decision on what they need to do to maintain their weapon. Did you want to add to that?
No, not really, other than just to, I guess, add to it a little bit is, our baton retention techniques involve essentially trying to separate, get that person's hand or hands off your baton. And if you can do that in a way that creates distance and there's no need for a strike if you do it in a way where the person is still in close proximity and still has the ability to grab the baton, or they're still holding on to the baton, then it may be necessary to actually incorporate some kind of a strike against their hands or something to get them to let go of the baton.
Further questions?
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. So, Chief, I want to say about 30 minutes perhaps before the vigil was interrupted, we saw about 15 to 20 unmarked SUVs pull into the municipal complex. I think they were mostly navy blue in color, and there was one Jeffco Sheriff's branded vehicle. Can you explain to us what the purpose of those vehicles were?
I can answer that. So our partners with Jeffco Sheriff were assisting us that day, sir, and we had actually positioned them at our District 2 station to be able to assist with the marches that went away from AMC. Around that same time that you probably saw those or you heard about those, the marches had all come back into the area. So at that time, it was just probably coincidental that we had said, hey, we had a representative with Jeffco. We had said, hey, it appears all the marches outside are gone, so come back and rendezvous with us at headquarters.
Okay. Follow up there. Let's say that there actually was, let me back up first. Did you actually see a threat to the protesters from other protesters? Because I heard y'all talking about pipes and all that stuff, and I really want to see that video footage. But did you ever see that directed at any of the other protesters, or was that used to menace the police presence there?
So I personally, we sent the line out to protect those individuals if what was happening in front of the police department flooded into their area. And so I don't know, do you have any?
Sir, are you talking about the violinists, or are you talking about the other people?
Oh, the group in front of the courtyard.
Okay, so I spoke earlier about that we have a duty to protect everyone that was there. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, no, I was asking if you actually saw, I'm sorry, if there's going to be video, but did, one, and two, did you actually see them menacing any of the protesters in any group? I apologize, to clarify.
Go ahead. Yes, sir, we had at least a couple different fights that broke out in the crowd. In fact, literally within the first hour that we were there, noticed a disturbance in the crowd, so pushing and shoving. And we learned that there were two counter-protesters that had entered the group that had assembled in front of our memorial. And the two counter-protesters were wearing some T-shirts that the protesters didn't like. A fight ensued, and those two counter-protesters actually had to be pulled out of the crowd for their own safety.
Okay, thank you. So following along that, so if there were actually these, groups of folks who were agitating against one another, what is the logic behind pushing everyone out into the parking lot, especially given the fact that there were young children in that area?
It would be to disperse the crowd, sir. As Chief talked about earlier, our experience, what we've seen, and we saw it during this event, is those few that are there to create problems and throw things at police and those types of things. Typically will do that, and then they'll do it from behind the cover of other people that are there that are not doing that. When we push out across the lawn, it strung all of those people out and dispersed them. Even those that chose to stay in close proximity to the officers' line were spread out along it, and there was not an opportunity for those that intended violence to hide behind others. We could see them very clearly at that point.
Okay, so you're certain that those folks would not have remingled with the people who were actually there for the violin concert around that truck?
No, I'm not certain of that. What I'm saying is the intent was to spread, just like we were spread out along a longer line, that had the effect of spreading out the entire group along a longer line. And so those that were intending violence did not have the ability to do it in their typical manner of hiding behind others. And so, as I believe I answered before, if either the violence intermingled, those that were there with the violinists intermingled with the folks that came from over by the courtyard, or vice versa, we couldn't really prevent that after the initial separation, as we already talked about, the L shape.
All right. So going back to this part of the night, what are the logistical concerns, I guess, about using OC spray, especially from those misters? I saw a lot of footage that doesn't really just hit one person. It kind of fans out a bit around youth and the elderly. And I know that there were folks there who were also mobility compromised.
Those are concerns. And, you know, we would expect the individuals that are making that decision to use OC to, you know, identify those risks and not use it if it was inappropriate. There are times, as I already talked about, where unintentionally, if an officer doesn't see perhaps a child behind somebody else or off to the side and there's, you know, deflection of the spray, or like I said before, if the person that was intended to receive the OC spray moves and the spray hasn't stopped, those would all be unintentional and obviously regrettable if that happened. The officers do the best they can to make those decisions. And if it happened, it's very unfortunate. And that's as much as I can really say about it. It wouldn't have been intentional.
Okay, so moving on. I have at least two constituents, one of whom is asthmatic. They have claimed that they were hit with tear gas, and I know y'all have said that you didn't use tear gas. So do you have anything that you can use to like prove that? Because I'm hearing this from the media and from my constituents.
To prove we didn't use tear gas?
Yes.
At some point, sir, you're just going to have to believe us. I don't know what else to tell you. So we did not use tear gas.
And I know, I think emotions are high. I think everyone is feeling this discussion deeply. We're in this profession to serve and protect, and we don't choose to intentionally hurt people. And so it's just very difficult, I think, for all of us in the room, how we started the meeting off and hearing the passion from the community and the sadness from the community and the anger from the community. And so, Mr. McConnell, you have I have been placed as the interim police chief, and I will give you my word that there was no tear gas used. There were 3 smoke canisters rolled out into the crowd, not thrown, but they're trained to roll it out. It was not used. But OC spray can also, especially if someone is asthmatic, it does affect breathing. And so that could have been misconstrued, but there was no tear gas. I repeat, there was no tear gas deployed that day, sir.
All right. Thank you. I do have a few more. Do any of my colleagues want to jump in, or can I continue here?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a follow-up on the use of various irritants. I received a communication from a journalist who said that he witnessed the use of pepper balls, and it was my understanding that we do not use pepper balls in our agency. So, and that was apparently around 7:45 p.m. that pepper balls were shot at individuals that were around the police station. Is there any clarification that can be given around that?
So we do not carry pepper balls, and pepper balls are not anything that we're authorized or trained on anymore. We used to have them years and years ago, but we do not use those.
Further questions?
Yes, Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you. So, yeah, specifically, I have seen footage of protesters who were compliant with the order to disperse being chased with OC spray. Is that? I think one of my colleagues rather alluded to this. Is that something that is typical?
No, sir, it isn't. And as I stated last night in interviews, if we will look at any use of force or any video that anybody wants to send us that shows that, we will look into it and open a use of force inquiry into that. And if it was used inappropriately, we will deal with that.
Okay. I have also seen footage of one of those canisters that you were talking about of, I guess, smoke.
Yes, sir.
Rolled at someone who was already compliant and had been pushed out onto the lawn from the courtyard. Is that also typical?
So they roll the canister out, sir. It's not directed at any person. If the people are staying in the proximity after dispersal orders have been given, It's not directed at that person. It's rolled out and with the terrain or someone hitting someone's foot or whatever direction it could go. It's not intended to specifically. We don't train to throw them at people, or we don't even throw them. We roll it out, sir.
Okay, well, I strongly encourage y'all to take a look at some of the footage from the protesters. There was another incident of a journalist who was, I guess, a photographer who ended up getting sprayed as well. I believe they were wearing a bright yellow vest and they had a camera out. What would the rationale for that be?
Sir, the media has a job to do. The former journalists have a job to do, and they chose to be in that situation with us. And I know that they want to report for everyone to see. And I think Division Chief Parker explained very well, I believe, that sometimes that if you are staying in close proximity to violence that is occurring or something that's trying to take a baton and OC spray is used as defending the officers, they may have incidental contact. And we reached out to some of the media folks that were there. We had discussions with them. And so, again, non-intentional, and they are in that position to do their job and report. And we appreciate their job that they do in this country. And so it is unfortunate that they had incidental contact.
Mayor?
Councilmember Bergen.
Yes, thank you. I just want to get this right, because I think I heard that there were over 50 dispersal orders given. Is that correct?
I'm looking at the man that was doing that.
The actual dispersal orders. So there were two of us, actually three of us, throughout the day giving different dispersal orders. But from the time where we first started having issues at the memorial, which was I think somewhere in the 3 to 4 o'clock hours, the first time we felt it necessary to actually give orders. They weren't all dispersal orders. Some of them were get off the fence, don't tip the fence over, those sort of things, to probably closer to 9 p.m. At a minimum. There were throughout the day 50 some orders. Probably a quarter or half of those were actual dispersal orders.
Okay, so those people that over and over hear the orders and make a personal response, decision, a personal decision to disobey a police order. You said earlier, they basically, it's a crime. And yet now we're hearing, well, they might have gotten some smoke or whatever. Had they left when they were told many, many, many times, they probably wouldn't have been affected by any of that smoke. So I'm concerned. We have council members that were there. They were there past the dispersal orders. I'm just concerned that nobody apparently listens to the police anymore. So we just have complete chaos.
Mayor Dave Gruber.
I think that was a statement.
Well, let me refer to the chief quickly.
No, I was just saying I think that was a statement, and I.
Yes, sorry, that was just a statement. Thank you.
I didn't know if I missed the question or I need to answer.
Councilmember Gruber.
Chief, is it accurate to say that, I only saw, like I said, the helicopter and I saw the videos, but is it accurate to say that the comments coming from the stage run by the socialists and the communists were much more aggressive and hostile than those coming from the Fountain area, speakers at the Fountain area?
Honestly, sir, I was focused in on the police department, and I could hear the violins through the radio transmissions, but I was in the building, so I wasn't able to hear. There were many people and calling for justice for Elijah, and whether they did it peacefully or whether they did it loudly, they were not the issue. The issue were the people that were trying to create violence and arming themselves against the police.
Okay, so but having said that, I understand that when the president of the NAACP, Omar Montgomery, and the family of Elijah McClain showed up, they spoke over at the Fountain. Yes. And did not speak in front of the police station. Is that true?
Yes, sir, you are correct.
And were you able to monitor and protect both, or monitor both sides simultaneously?
Yes, sir, and that it was completely peaceful.
Okay, and then
yes.
The final question is did having council members who stayed in the area after the dispersal order complicate the job of the police department? Maybe don't answer that. Maybe I suspect it did, and I won't force you to give an answer.
Can I clarify real quick?
Councilmember.
A couple of things. One, Omar Montgomery did also spend some time over directly in front of that fence observing what was going on, and I know because I was right there next to him while he was doing it. And second of all, I was informed later in the day that after I had left due to my concerns about heat, no one was even aware that I had returned.
Mayor.
Further questions? Councilmember McConnell.
Yes, I have one last question and then just a statement. So I have also seen footage of a protester getting hosed down by OC spray, and I do mean hosed down, through the footage, basically holding a sign and yelling at an officer. I really want you all to take a good look at that as well. All of these videos and more are readily available on the Denver subreddit. There's a nice compilation of them right there that you can go take a look at. And also, it is worth noting that in the violin area, I didn't even know there was an order to disperse. I just saw the riot cops show up, and that's when everyone freaked out, justifiably so, because you couldn't hear anything but the beautiful music.
Further questions?
Mayor, this is Councilmember Berzins.
Councilmember Berzins.
Thank you. I just want to say that I was there earlier, and it was a beautiful, beautiful vigil for Elijah McClain. There was a lot of love in there. People were happy, and they were glad to be there to support him. I did leave like Councilmember Coombs. It got a little hot, so I left before the march started. But I did want to say that I am glad that, let me turn my camera on, sorry. I'm glad that there was that love, that peace, and I maybe we're missing a little bit. You know, this was for Elijah McClain and not really us. You know, maybe we're missing that there was a peaceful protest. People did show their First Amendment rights, and I think he would be happy. His mom would be happy. There were wonderful speakers there. So I'm glad that first part happened. I was surprised that the march happened down Alameda. It shut down all 6 lanes of Alameda. I was surprised that it went down 225. 225 was shut down from Mississippi to 6th. And I did see the helicopters overhead. Then they marched down 6th, which shut down 6th. Then they marched back up Chambers. So it shut down Chambers. So I think that showed a lot in respect for Elijah. I really did. But I guess moving on, if you'll allow me to continue moving on through the day, I guess I can understand where in the Great Lawn, when it started getting dark later in the day, that there were 2, and now I'm hearing maybe 3 different groups. And I kind of understand that, as big as the Great Lawn is, that if you're over in one area, maybe you don't know what's going on in another area because it is so large, and people are talking, and I could see the confusion of, around the violinists. They're concentrating on the beautiful music, and maybe they didn't know what was going on. So I can understand the confusion there. But it is nice to know, and I'll say in preface, I'm sure we've all gotten emails and seen Facebook posts and Twitter that there's been a lot of confusion, information put on there, but it's nice to know, and I even heard that there were no dispersals, but it's good to know that we have a name of a person who says he did do it. He did it in Spanish, and I believe Chief Wilson said that there could be 2 other ones. And I can understand, like I said, maybe the people listening to the music didn't hear it because there was so much going on. But I'm not here to say that it didn't happen, because it could have happened. And maybe, they just didn't hear it. I'm glad to hear that there was no tear gas, because we've all heard, yes, there was tear gas. And now we've heard tonight there were no pepper balls either. So it's nice to get the facts out on that. I do appreciate that. And I guess my question for Chief Wilson is, was anyone hurt all day?
As far as injuries that were reported to us, there was, during the march, there was a lady that was marching down the street and had a vehicle allegedly strike her. And so I want to thank Councilmember Murillo for reaching out to me, and her phone was dying, and she facilitated me to be able to send officers to take a report. So I don't know the extent of her injuries. We are investigating that so that we can look at the entire group and that situation and see if their charges can be filed.
Okay.
Obviously, officers went to the hospital, and there were people that received pepper spray and baton strikes, and so injury, I would imagine, occurred during that. As far as the pepper spray is temporary, it goes away with time. But if someone was struck with a baton, there could possibly be an injury. So I'm not going to say that there weren't any injuries, but they were not specifically reported to me.
It was nothing like what happened at Denver, though. So, no. Yeah, okay. That I guess that's kind of my point. It was, if there was injuries, it was nothing compared to what happened to Denver. But I do appreciate what council members have asked, their questions. We've gotten our questions answered. And I can kind of tell by looking at people that we've been getting questions online and answered those. So, I'm glad that we're able to do this. And so going forward,